Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. This is the final episode of our Xenosaga analysis. I am joined by a large panel today. We have with us TJTheEmperor.
Hello.
Welcome back. So glad to have you. You've been with us here since the very, very beginning of this series.
Yeah, 2 years ago is when we first started this?
It's been quite a while.
Like when the first episode was 2 years ago, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, sounds about right.
It's crazy.
So glad you're here. Glad you've been with us the whole time. It's been really great to have you along the way.
Absolutely.
Keith is back as well. He's also been with us, not quite as extensively as TJ, but from the beginning, for each panel discussion we did at the end of every one of these games. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Doing excellent. Very excited to be back. I think this series ends with a bang, so I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, David, who is with us at the end of episode 2 for the panel discussion there. David, how are you doing?
Hey, fine. Well, a little bit soon here in Japan because I really had to wake up early, but, this game, it's totally worth it. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, we appreciate you doing that. I know the time zone's really, really crazy for you, and you've got other stuff going on today. You may end up having to bounce a little earlier than other people. Apologize that the scheduling didn't work out perfectly for every single person on this panel. It rarely does. But glad that you are here, glad that you took the time and that you woke up early. Thank you for that. And now, final guest and a new guest for us, Aidan. How are you, man?
Hey, how's it going? I'm great. I'm ready to talk about these games. This is like my favorite series of all time.
Yeah, I wanted to invite you on specifically because you are one of our patrons who's been with us really, really extensively here for the episode 3 stuff. But I get messages, personal messages from you almost after every episode that we do that adds a lot of great context to stuff we're talking about. You clearly have like a very, very sound knowledge of the series, like way more than Case and I for sure. And so I wanted to have you on because rather than maybe like read some of your comments and try to summarize them, I thought it'd be really great to have you add to this discussion a lot of the stuff you've been sharing with me in private messages. So thank you for taking the time. I know it's not always easy for people who aren't like used to coming on and doing like live YouTube recordings and stuff. And so I wasn't sure what your comfortability would be with that, but I'm very excited to hear what you have to add.
Thanks for having me on. I'm a little shy, but I'm all right.
Okay, good. So what I want to do here to start off, we talked a little bit in the pre-show here about how we wanted to structure this conversation because it could go like an almost infinite number of ways. And there's an infinite number of topics that like could be talked about for hours each. So clearly we're not going to be able to do everything that we want to do, but this will be a longer discussion than typical for our episode runtimes. We'll probably go up to 3+ hours. And I want to hit on some really key important points. But I think before we do that, it might be a good idea first to just kind of go around the panel and have everyone talk about their individual experience with Xenosaga, why it's important to you, the impact that it had on your life, and why it is that you watched our, I don't even know how many episodes or hours long discussion on a game, and then had the interest to further come on and talk with us for hours at a time. What prompted that? What prompted that kind of passion? So why don't we start with David? This was something that I think you for sure wanted to touch on.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that Xenosaga, I consider it about my top 5 of games that have like a deepest impact in my life. Maybe not necessarily the best when it comes to quality, but when it comes to how it impacted the course of my life, it's up there. The first one, I always say that it's still Ocarina of Time, by far. But then the number 2, I go back and forth between Xenosaga as a whole and Terra Enigma. And there are many reasons for that. Obviously, the story primarily, because it's so deep, it's so fascinating, both from a plot standpoint, character standpoint, and philosophy in standpoint. I have, I'm not as deep in philosophy as maybe other people do thanks to this game. But even then, thanks to Xeno games as a whole, I started to try reading philosophy. And obviously Nietzsche, because it's the philosopher that these games reference the most, but also about psychology, Freud, Jung, and all this stuff. Again, I'm not as deep as maybe some of you guys, but it's something that really took me for a loop back in my college years. But also something that I touched upon for episode 2, which was that I tried to translate the first 2 games into Spanish, and right now that's my job. So I don't know if I'll be what I'm right now if I hadn't taken that first step into fan translation.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So just so everybody knows, David is he's doing translating localization as a full-time job. He works in Japan, working on games. So you actually fulfilled that dream. You went all the way, and now you're doing that.
Yeah, obviously there are other steps that I took in between, and other games that also helped me in that journey. But Xenosaga was one of the first. But there's one last thing, that is that, okay, during the time when I was in college in the early 2000s, I was in a very, very deep depression. And because of that depression, I never finished college back then. Right now, I'm back in also. I'm studying and I'm working and studying video game design here in Japan. So I'm trying to give it another go. But back then, I couldn't finish college in large part because of that depression. And one of the things that helped me to get out of it was the Xeno games as a whole, alongside another game that is also up there, which is Tales of the Abyss, which I recommend. Mm-hmm. And so these 2 games, alongside other stuff outside of video games, are things that help me to finally get out of that depression that basically hold me back for many years. So obviously that's something that obviously stays with you very way longer after the fact.
Yeah, one thing that has been interesting about just kind of the direction that this particular series went, Kaysen and I kind of like to not overly plan like our discussions. And kind of just let them.
Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad.
Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But in general, we like to kind of feel the conversation and let it flow into a place that maybe we didn't necessarily plan. And in this case, it is interesting how much Xenosaga prompted discussion about mental health. And so I feel like not only for us and the stuff we talked about, but like viewer responses too. Just some really, really incredible stories that people shared about themselves and were willing to be vulnerable about that I think this game found a way to sort of touch on and like help people get in touch with themselves in this way. And so that to me, I think, is my biggest takeaway from Xenosaga is despite anything we might discuss here in a minute about plot or execution or how silly it may or may not be from time to time, like the fact that it prompted that, I think is a testament to kind of how deep this game's sort of like myriad of philosophy, psychology, and reference to really, really important, relatable, just like life hardships that people go through and the deep sort of like hardship that people, I would say everyone encounters in their life and really brings that out of them and gets you in touch with that. I was just amazed by how many people sort of had that common experience with this series. So let's pass it on real quick to TJ next. TJ, I'd like to hear from you, man.
Oh God! The thought of summing up like what these games mean to me in like 2 or 3 minutes is like like a fool's errand.
Impossible.
I was actually thinking of making a full length video on this exact subject eventually, so look forward to that maybe.
Full length means an hour, right?
An hour, yeah, or like 30, 45 minutes, yeah. But like, okay, so in brief, similar to what David was saying, like I legit think that this series, specifically episode 1 in particular, like legitimately did change my life. I was a fan of this series. Like, you know, I read about it in magazines before episode 1 came out in the United States. I got the game as a birthday gift, like probably less than a month after it was released here. And I fell in love with it immediately. Like I had played RPGs before, like, you know, I'd played a lot of RPGs up to that point. Like I was big into Final Fantasy and a lot of the Square stuff from the 90s, early 2000s. But this, like, I had never really experienced a story quite like this ever. And it was just even though I didn't understand everything that I was, you know, that I was playing, that I was hearing, like even when I was that young, like I felt like there was something there, and it made me want to learn like as much as I can about it. Like, you know, to give just a brief example, you know, when I was 13, I didn't know who Nietzsche was, but, you know, this game introduced me to that. And I started reading Nietzsche because this game introduced me to his work. Not that I'm any sort of Nietzsche expert or anything, but, this game did introduce me to that. And there's a vivid memory that I have during my first playthrough of the game. There's a scene in episode 1 where Joachim Mizrahi is standing on top of Labyrinthos before he commits suicide, and he's reciting this quote from the Book of Revelation. And after I had finished that part of the game, that night I read the entire Book of Revelation from start to finish. Like, that's the sort of, like, I wanted to, like, to know, like, what this game is drawing from, sort of get as much as I can out of it. And, like, you know, even beyond that, like, I went to school, I studied literature because I wanted to be an English teacher. And I think not just specifically this game, but like this game, Final Fantasy VII, like those early RPGs that I played did, I think, push me in that direction. And I'll leave it at one more thing, because, you know, we were just talking about the mental health component that these games had. And, you know, when I was 13, I was very much not as knowledgeable on my mental health as I am now, obviously. But I think even though, like, when I played the game, even then, I couldn't necessarily put my finger on it specifically, but, like, I felt that, like, I was drawn to these characters. And you were going to talk about Xion later, and Xion's always been a character that I've really resonated with. And I think even back when I was very young and I didn't really understand why, I felt some sort of resonance with her character. And even today, when I replay the games, and I replayed them all last year, and, like, one of the things that still sticks with me is, like, how much, you know, I still feel that resonance with not just her, but a lot of the other characters in the game, like, even, you know, decades after the fact. So I really think that Takahashi Tanaka, the whole Monolith Soft team, just made something, like, very, very special with this series. Like, it means so much to me.
Yeah. That's one thing I've heard a lot from our viewers too, is just how, like, deep, layered, flawed, and relatable the characters are in this game versus almost anything that you can find out there. And so I definitely agree with that. Aidan, why don't we hit you up next?
Okay, so I played Xenosaga maybe 10 plus years ago, maybe in 2011, 2012. So the games had been out for a while. And there wasn't a lot of information about these games online back then. It feels like, at least there was not any kind of story analysis or anything like that. But these games blew my freaking world open, because I'm actually a Cherokee Nation citizen. So I kind of live like in like this area where, I mean, you can get games like this, but I mean, I got this game like secondhand at like a used game store for like $10. Not 3, but 2. 2 was the first one that I first played. And just, wow, kind of just blew my mind. So I was really trying to find people who I could talk to about it after I had finished the whole series, because I ended up buying the first game, and I ordered the third game online eventually. It was getting a little bit hard to find then. But yeah, just wow, like all the characters and like all the interesting, like the synthesis of ideas that was present in the game just kind of blew me away. Like, and so I started talking to people, and I eventually made friends with some people. I help run, not run specifically, but I administrate like godsib.net, and like, which is kind of connected to Xeno Underground. So godsib.net's kind of making a comeback, but it's, the thing about that is that there were these fan sites that used to exist for this series, notably Xeno Tensei and godsib.net. These two sites kind of got discontinued or dismantled or hacked or something in like the early 2010s, and so by the time I had found out about them, they didn't exist anymore. And so I kind of have devoted like a lot of time collecting materials, preserving materials, because that's part of like what I like to do, is just archive everything related to these games.
That's awesome, because it's I think in particular Xenosaga needs archiving. There's, I mean, you know, the
you think?
Pied Piper and missing gear and a whole bunch of stuff that's like, if there aren't people out there being diligent about, you know, storing this stuff somewhere, it'd be pretty easy to lose it. Okay, why don't we pass it on to Keith, and then we'll move on to our next this part of the discussion.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to be a bit of a broken record with everybody else by echoing a lot of the same sentiments of this series. For me, it started with the original Xenogears, really profoundly affected my life. I mean, in addition to all the amazing presentational aspects that you all have talked about that are more on the superficial side, what really sort of speaks to me about Xenogears and the Xenosaga series, and it's truly a triumph in the way that it merges like deeply complex and like largely accurate mathematical ideas and spiritual traditions and philosophy and psychoanalysis in like this groundbreaking and kind of scientifically plausible way. You know, you got things like, you know, Hilbert fields and quantum mechanics, etc. And this union of sort of technology and spirituality is something that I really needed kind of in my early 20s. Like when I was in college, I kind of had like a, you know, early midlife crisis, I guess you could say, where I desperately want to do something meaningful in my life. So, you know, wrestling with these ideas of free will and destiny, etc. And, you know, and because of that, I've always been sort of like a little bit of a mystic, you know, like ancient traditions. And, you know, I was always the guy like, you know, reading like Wicca books and stuff in high school, like trying to figure out if there's anything to it.
You're like Gene.
Yeah. And then, but then that kind of didn't square with my like, you know, outward life of being like a scientist and doing like hardcore mathematics. And Xenogears and Xenosaga sort of presented this vision of how these things could be both true in this sort of plausible way and feed each other. You know, it was, you know, like how like your spiritual mindset might affect things like entropy, heat death, etc., which this game goes into. We'll touch on it later. But I just found that to be like fascinating, and it kind of painted targets for what I actually wanted to do in my life. So it kind of painted the trajectory of my life. You know, this is why I started a life extension research focused charity, because I wanted to make that, you know, lifespan.io. I wanted to make that technology real. This is why I went into technology development for a lot of major like media companies. I don't necessarily care about or like care super much about just the entertainment aspect of those technologies, but things like, you know, the metaverse and brain computer interface technology, it's like the encephalon dives, etc. So I literally like want to make these technologies real in the world. So that's definitely has some roots in the Xeno series. And the last thing I'll just say is just like, it's just like amazing how these games, especially the Xenosaga series here, can make you really deeply care about characters without you really needing to actually understand what is like actually going on. Like how did they sort of like pull that trick off? Like this is truly a game with no villains if you understand what's actually going on in the plot. And that's really kind of hard to pull off.
Yeah.
And sort of like tying a bow on this, I believe, in my opinion, at the heart of this series is a single message that is truly simultaneously one of the most empowering, comforting, and compassion-inducing ideas that I've seen put forth in any medium, which is basically that you might be able to literally change the structure of the entire universe by altering what is in your own heart and mind, even if you are never able to like express it successfully, like manifestly in the world. Like what goes on inside you has a part to play in the saving of the universe. And I think that's like a wonderful, beautiful thought, especially to those who feel alone or unseen. And I just love that about this series.
I love that. Well put.
The quote from Febronia that a single human thought can change the world. I think that's what you mean, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I think we'll keep it here on Keith for this next part. But one thing we wanted to do is just step back and break down the plot of this trilogy. What actually happened? and who was who, and what did they actually want in like the most basic layman's terms that we can. And so Keith, and I know Aidan is very familiar, and TJ and others probably as well, but Keith just read the Perfect Works guide for Xenosaga 3 and had some thoughts on this, so I figured I'd pass it to him to sort of spearhead this part of the discussion.
Perfect.
On Discord, Birmo has taken words out of my mouth. Oh, so we're here for 6 hours. Nice.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll quite go that long.
I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to truly hit the like purely in layman terms aspect, but I'll do my best. And I want to do this in parts, so I'm not just talking for like 10 minutes. So the first part, what I want to do is like, what is the structure of the universe that we're in here? Because that is necessary to understand what everyone's actually doing. So based on reading Perfect Works and mulling about it, I think I know it's the structure of the universe. I want to just sort of lay that out and first then pause there and see if you guys agree or not. So as far as I can tell, the structure of the universe of Xenosaga is as follows. There is a higher order domain. Think of it like, more than like X, Y, and Z, like more, like this is the realm of the wave existence, Udu, etc. So there's a higher order domain and many, or perhaps infinite, lower order domains, including the one that our characters exist in. And each lower order domain is itself divided into two, the real number domain and the imaginary number domain, which you can think of as like material and spiritual, right? And the term like higher or lower, I think is meant in the sense of like cardinality in mathematics, which is like the size or the level of infinity. Okay. So a person's body, like us, exists in the real number domain, but like parts of your consciousness are represented in the imaginary number domain. And when someone dies, their consciousness becomes sort of depersonalized or de-point of viewed, whatever you want to say, and kind of drawn back into the universal unconscious, which is serving as a glue that sort of keeps the imaginary number domain and by consequence the real number domain together. So this all comprises the universe. And those in the lower order domains cannot perceive the higher order domain at all. But nonetheless, the lower order domains are necessary to sustain the higher order domain, such that the collapse of any part of this system in a bad way, I'll get into what that means later, can destroy the higher order domain and literally the whole universe. And the exception of this inability for lower domain beings to perceive the higher domain is if a higher domain being like Udu observes the lower domain universe. And this sort of creates like a contact point that allows the lower order domain to perceive the higher domain. And anything in the lower domain has a dual representation in the real and imaginary. Humans exist in the real and consciousness touches the imaginary, while entities like the Gnosis and Testaments exist primarily in the imaginary domain, which can affect the real domain. And this relationship is why the Gnosis and Testaments can like kill people, but normally without the Hilbert effect, humans can't really interact with Gnosis, which has basis in mathematics. Because if you think of the real number line, if you do any operations on the real number line, you stay in the real number domain. If you take 5 times 5, you get 25. But in the imaginary number domain, there are certain things that you can do, like multiplying I by I, and you end up with a number in the real domain. So that's how Gnosis can kill us. So I'll pause there. I'm sure that was more detailed than what was presented in the game, but does everything I say, do you agree with that, anyone? Or do you disagree with anything that I said? Because I think we have to understand this before we move on.
No,
I agree.
That's really
sounds great.
That's a really great and actually very succinct and that's about as perfect a summary as I think could be made of that.
I was going to applaud you on how concise that was, because I've seen lore summary videos on this series that's like make me confused, and I've played these games more times than I can count. This is like, even if you are like, know a lot about this stuff, like keeping all the lore together it's really complicated. There's a lot going on. So I couldn't have explained it in that concise of a way. So
yeah, I think what this really helps to clear up, which I think Kaysen and I maybe failed to do as we were talking about it through the series, is separating the higher domain from what's called the imaginary number domain. Those are different things.
Yeah.
And so
I don't think the
like
game
the way
itself, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think the game itself makes that distinction.
Yeah, I assumed they were the same.
Yeah, no, I think the only, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the only entity that we see that comes from the higher order domain or the highest order domain is Udu. Is that correct? Okay, that's what I thought.
Whereas the Gnosis come from the imaginary domain, right?
The Gnosis and the Testaments.
I guess I did understand. I didn't think the Gnosis came from where Udu comes from. So I guess I did kind of compartmentalize them.
I mean, I think you can figure it out just based on the context, but like, if it's not explained, I can see why someone would get confused for sure.
Yeah, I was not clear on
the
this.
games do explain it. The games do explain it, but this is a recurring problem with Xenosaga as a whole, that many of its more outdated concepts are more explained inside the database instead of inside the
story. I was going to ask if in episode 3 there was a database entry for all this.
I mean,
there's a really interesting thing that the database does, is that it kind of delineates it kind of delineates people or beings with consciousness from other objects in the physical domain. It refers to things that don't have a consciousness as things with like static data, which was really a really interesting distinction. And there's also some really there's a diagram of this in the it's like that really kind of shows how this all works in the Perfect Guide. But it's like go ahead. But that's all really I wanted to say. Like the database kind of does delineate it, but it's actually the really important thing to understand is that the humans in this universe, in the Xenosaga universe, they don't understand this. Nobody really understands how this system is working or operating, and a lot of times when like Udu like contacts like the lower domain, they don't really know how to respond to that because they aren't aware of this greater system and that leads to a lot of things happening to some of these characters that might not be good.
Yeah. I feel like the only one who understands everything is probably Wilhelm, maybe Chaos.
It's those two. That's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There was something really interesting you said there, Aidan, about how nobody in the games world really understands how this works. So I was just in Brazil for a couple weeks, and it's a long flight down there. So I watched for the first time on the plane Tenet, the movie Tenet, and it was hilarious to me. I won't even like try to explain like the basic plot of that movie. It's really, really insane. But basically, there are certain objects that move backwards through time. and so as the main character is having this explained to him, like there are certain objects that might look like they're the same, but one has been designed to move backwards through time, and the other one is normal, right? The character who is explaining this, who is doing the exposition for how this works, ends up saying to him, "Don't try to understand it, just like feel it, just like react to these things by instinct." And I
know what I love?
Really,
that was
really,
an instruction to the audience.
Exactly. That's
Secretly.
Exactly what it was. What they were really saying was, audience, don't try to understand this. Just get that some things move backwards through time and watch the cool action unfold. And so I kind of feel like there's a little bit of an element like that going on here too, where the game does not often in its main text try to bog down the story with explanations like this, and rather would just have you get a sort of like general vague gist of it, but like don't think too hard about that.
Which I think it did a good job in that sense.
It's funny. It's funny considering how much explanation is in the game already. So it's like, okay, this is as much as we can do. Don't expect it to go any further because it's crazy already.
I remember when I made my video on episode 3 specifically, the last part that I did, it was like sort of a thematic analysis using Xion's character as a base. And when I wrote that section of the script, I set a goal for myself. Okay, I'm going to write this entire section without using the terms real and imaginary number domain at all. Because I think, it's interesting, but like the point I wanted to get at is you don't need to know anything about that in order to get something very, very meaningful from this story.
But what I love, though, is the way that Keith just explained it, which is totally true, that two imaginary numbers can combine to make a real number, but two real numbers can't combine to make an imaginary number. So it kind of can only go one way, and I didn't think of it that way. But so it's like they did think this stuff through. They just didn't necessarily explain it, overly over-explain it, I think.
To piggyback on that, again, something else that's just sort of said without any qualifiers is the Hilbert effect. Because that is related to this in like quantum gravity and stuff of like Hilbert fields are a way to sort of bridge imaginary numbers and real numbers. So that's what I'm trying to say is like this stuff is kind of real.
Cool. So cool. But you wouldn't know it's real. You would just think it's made up sci-fi mumbo jumbo. But it's like, no, they did some research. They just didn't have to give you a math lesson, which I would not have appreciated in the middle of the game. Maybe I would have, but most people wouldn't,
Yeah, and before we go to the plot, like one just defense, because, it's a common critique of like, you guys even discuss it, and I agree with it sometimes too. It's like, oh, like, why are you being like so obtuse? Like, why can't you just say the thing, right? What I will say as a defense of that is now that I think I understand what's going on, if you go back and like read all of the sort of cryptic, obtuse things that like Wilhelm says or whatever, it does all fit neatly into this scaffold. Like it is logically consistent. You just don't know the full picture that they do or he does.
I was going to say
that's something that's very good. To me, that is one of the key aspects of Xenosaga as a whole. That is like you may think that something doesn't make sense, but if you dig deep enough, you realize, oh, actually, there's an explanation here, and it's. I mean, again, it's not always in the script of the story, but at the very least, it's in the database. So you say they thought this through very, very, very deeply, and I think that one of the things about this series that really, really blew my mind.
Yeah, and I was going to say, related to that, like I know in like several episodes, you guys are saying like, and this bothers me too for most things, like in a movie or any sort of story where they're being like intentionally vague to sort of build this sense of mystery, like that can, and in most cases it is, like a very cheap narrative device. I am willing to give Takahashi the benefit of the doubt because he has never let me down with doing that. In Xenogears, Xenosaga, even Xenoblade, like he's like the only person that can do it well. So I am willing to forgive him for doing that because I know he can pull it off.
I'll also say it's just more rewarding in general. Like, once you get past all, like, the confusion and stuff, it's like, once you engage with these concepts and figure them out for yourself, it's like, oh, wow, okay, I get it now. Like, this is, like, the kind of stuff that this team was trying to convey to me. And yeah, so I just think that it's really cool that you can learn a lot of things from these games like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so I think we've sufficiently laid out the structure of the game's universe. Why don't we move on now to the plot?
Okay, so I'm going to ask for your patience here. This might take about 5 minutes, but I think the rest of the conversation we'd be better off for it. Okay, so given that structure, one higher order domain, many lower order domains, imaginary and real. In the lower order domain that this game is set in, there is an accelerating trend of consciousnesses rejecting life. And this is leading to a refusal of souls to connect with each other during life and refusal to join the universal unconscious after death. Those rejecting souls become gnosis. If this trend continues, it will eventually lead to some critical threshold being passed where the imaginary domain's dissolution energy, so to speak, exceeds the coherence force of the universal unconsciousness, a spiritual entropy heat death, so to speak. And if this were to happen, it would rip apart the imaginary number domain, which in turn would destroy the real number domain, and importantly, also take with it the upper domain and all lower domains, essentially the complete end of the universe. Udu, a higher dimensional being, perceives this. And in order to sort of work against this end of the universe, it begins to observe the lower order domain to learn, what's going on and why. And as described earlier, this observation creates contact points that are observable in the lower domain. In the real number domain, this contact eventually becomes perceivable as Abel. And in the imaginary domain, it's Abel's arc. It's also not super clear in the game, but it seems like this contact can also result in the creation of like godlike interface points, like the Zohar and the Anima relics, that'll tie into Chaos later. So perhaps in response to this observation or not, the lower order domain also manifests its own self-defense mechanism, so to speak. The universal unconscious in the imaginary domain manifests Chaos, who has the fail-safe power of Anima, which can essentially completely self-destruct the lower order domain, but in some kind of safe way that would not contaminate the upper domain or destroy the entire universe. So Chaos can basically suicide this lower order domain and leave everything else untouched. On the other hand, Wilhelm is manifested as kind of like the literal Gnostic demiurge, designed to preserve the existence of this lower order domain. Not the whole universe, this lower order domain, by triggering eternal recurrence before the dissolution threshold is reached, right? So basically, Wilhelm is a manifestation of the lower domain's will to preserve itself, and Chaos's power is a manifestation of the lower domain's will to preserve the entire universe at the expense of itself, if necessary. And despite being born with that function, Chaos does not want to employ this failsafe because he, Maria, the Messiah, etc., believe that there might be some other better way to save the universe. And Maria sort of creates relics able to like extract and harness Chaos's energy, and maybe Udu's energy as well, to other purposes besides that failsafe, such as the ability to change the form of the lower domain, and that could be capable of like matter shifts and shifting things into upper domains or doing eternal recurrence. So those are basically the stakes. So basically the options are, it was also a representation of Chaos's power that was transcribed and later turned into Lemegeton, and the Y data, maybe the Y is Yeshua data and all that. So the options, basically, here are the stakes. The options are the universe will completely collapse in some amount of time, 10,000 years, whatever. The whole universe. The power of Anima is used to destroy the problematic lower domain, and the rest of the universe is fine. Eternal recurrence is used to keep this lower domain in a time loop so the collapse never happens, or some other way, which could lead into Xenogears, perhaps. We'll touch on that later. All right, I'm more than halfway through. Okay, so now Udu, from its perspective, is not trapped in this time loop as a higher order domain being. He's like observing the looping, happening. And it notices that with each recurrence, things are not exactly the same, copy of a copy of a copy, things are slightly changing here and there. And basically, Udo starts to think that maybe something can change, and he comes into contact with someone he is observing who's, just to back up. As you all know, when Udo makes contact with someone, because he or it has this vision of the end of the universe, when it makes contact with Yuriev or someone like that, they perceive that end of the universe, even though that's not like what Udo is like trying to push on them, and that's what drives them into that crazy fear. But Udo contacts with someone who does not exhibit that fear. That is Nephilim, right? So basically, he comes to think, or it comes to think, that Nephilim is special. And after what happens with her in the other games, she becomes an imaginary number domain existence, Udo wants to observe her more. And that's why Abel is first created as a real number existence, to observe her from like a different angle, like he can observe her from imaginary to imaginary, or upper to imaginary, because she's in the imaginary. But Abel was created to observe her initially from the real to the imaginary, like gathering more information, right? And this is all relevant because at the end of the series, the final part of the game that you guys only got to touch on in the last episode, you might have noticed that the power kind of swizzles from Maria into Nephilim at the end. It is Nephilim that inherits the power of Animus from Maria, which is basically like a control on the power of Anima. Let's not get into it right now. And while this is not super clear in the game, this also allows Nephilim to be able to be incarnated in the real number domain again, like Abel. And that allows for the potential, from Udo's perspective, of new potential possibilities and maybe new potential ways to shape the future of the universe, which now, ties into what we first talked about, and now how I realize this could be very deeply connected to Xenogears. I'll leave it vague for now, but this idea ties wonderfully with the end of Xenogears and the conversation that Faye has with Krelian on the nature of human connection and whether there's faith that people can truly connect with each other or not. If this backstory is part of Xenogears, where there's a 10,000 year time limit, and that if human beings don't figure out how to connect with each other, the universe is destroyed, it raises the stakes at the end of Xenogears in kind of a beautiful way. So I'll pause it there. There's a lot more things I didn't talk about, Kanan, et cetera, but you can ask me questions too on any of these details, like Kanan or whatever. I can fill in how it fits into that scaffold. But that's really what's going on. Everybody is trying to save the universe in these competing ways, because they don't have faith that way is going to work. So we got to do this way. But no, that way is not going to work. We got to do this way. And as far as I understand it, that's what's going on here.
Mike, I challenge you, to take Keith's explanation into a YouTube short and see how many views does it get.
Well, I don't know if I could make it into YouTube short.
Was that okay? I felt like I was like a college professor. Is it okay?
Yeah,
that was like
YouTube Shorts.
That was great. Again, I don't think I've heard that explained in a more concise way.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Very good. In some ways, I feel like Keith played a different game from me, and I don't know exactly why, but I feel like
because none of this is discussed.
I feel like we played a game that had the same place names and proper nouns and people names. But I don't know that I quite got everything that you got from when I played the game.
Yeah, I'm just going to say here that, I've for the last few episodes, I've been sort of teasing this idea that the game's story is not nearly as complex as it may seem, as the characters in the game explain the plot to you. And Keith has more or less confirmed basically my sentiment on that. Like, the real plot, we're not talking about themes or like character arcs or all of those other things that add flavor, and really dig at some of the stuff that, we've pulled from our, multi-episode discussion on this series. But at the very, very root of the game's just like plot is this idea that the universe is coming to an end, and you have these different factions that are working in their own way to try to save it in the way that they think is the one that will work or whatever.
And not just save it, the lower domain, but but I guess like the goal is to keep the lower domain in order to save the higher domain, right? Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on which character you're talking about, because like some characters don't care about anything other than the lower domain that they're in or whatever.
Right, because they don't see anything else. Yeah.
But
here's the thing though. If so, take Keith's explanation, which was very good and opened so many doors for me, and I kind of understand the game a lot better now. Take his explanation though, and use that as a template to make a game. Be like, hey, let's make a game where Nephilim and Abel and Udu and the upper domain and lower domain, and let's tell that story in a game. But this is not the game that I would have created to tell that story. This game is about Xion and difficult struggles with life, and about Jean and about Cosmos and all of this stuff. Whereas the actual story, as you summarize the game, Keith, is actually has to do with like completely different people.
Well, this is in part
where it crosses over into what I think maybe Mike will want to steer the conversation towards is that backstory now tees up a lot of themes that become interesting, like chaos as an example. He was born.
I know nothing about.
Yeah, so he was born with a very specific purpose to basically self-destruct the lower domain, but he doesn't want to. So now, like Kanan, his will, his personal will, is at odds with the on paper reason for his existence, etc. So like that's just one example of how this crazy backstory kind of comes into an actual theme.
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, from here, the only problem that people seem to have, even among people who understand this, is the part where they say, "Wait, in order to save the universe, Chaos has to destroy it." That's the one, the element that rubs some people the wrong way.
That's
the part I did not. I did not understand that at all when I was playing the game. Like I was like, "What is Chaos's motivate?" I was like totally lost with that until I read this.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, as a response to what Kaysen said there, if you are setting out to tell the story of all these competing factions working to save the universe, why did you tell this particular story where Xion was sort of like the center character for that? And my answer to that is that Takahashi is looking to tell that story over the course of like 6 episodes that span 15,000 years. He's not looking to tell that story in the Xion arc. So
you're right. Xenosaga turned into the Xion arc, but it was not. Yeah. It was supposed to be different characters.
Yeah, we got one story arc out of 3, and just one.
This is where I think it's more strongly connected with Xenogears, and that again, I don't know Takahashi's mind, but like if what I was saying was somewhat accurate at the end of this game with Nephilim and Abel, I think then you can almost see this as like the larger narrative, the larger personal human theme is on this idea, because the whole problem here is that consciousnesses are rejecting life. The universe is spiraling apart. People aren't connecting with each other. Like,
gosh, you're describing the real world, by the way, when you say that.
Yeah, well, that's all sci-fi reflects the real world.
Totally, it's a mirror. But like Takahashi he isn't just a genius. He's like very human. He's a very grounded genius. And his wife, of course, is what's hard to kind of separate the two. But
that's what I like.
These are absolute geniuses. Like these are mathematicians. These are psychologists. These are like high level scientists who decided to make a game and who just kind of educated themselves on their own time. Like they're savants. They are, but they also understand the human condition like deeply. And that's rare. That's rare.
That's what I love about their work is because they can balance that like ridiculous, like super macro level, like universal forces in conflict with each other. But also, if you want to look at the games as an exploration of these very, very, very flawed people and just leave it at that, that's fine. Cause that's, there's a lot of that there.
Yeah. To speak to what Mike was saying, what I think maybe was the vision here, the full 6-episode vision, was I think what's going on with Xion, especially what happens with Kevin and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think that is, to your point, Mike, not meant to be in isolation. It almost tees up like, it's like there's an evolution of characters throughout the entire series, and kind of like Xion is one of the first that's kind of attending to these issues. But then like, in a sense, Faye will pick up that mantle and take it further in Xenogears. So that's where I think it was kind of like meant to fit.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And so the scale of this story, when you take all of that into account, is just it blows your mind a second time, even though you thought you understood the scale of what they were trying to accomplish before. It's just unbelievable that a person imagined they could do that. Like that they thought they could really tell that story in 6 episodes. It's crazy.
A video game series that is as like, what's the word, like that tries to do as much as this one does?
I can't think of one. No,
ambitious.
Yeah, ambitious. That's the word I'm thinking of. Yeah,
I really can't think of another example that's even close. Like, I think there's a lot of other stories that have they are as ambitious in terms of its thematic content, like the philosophical side of things, like the exploring sort of like the deeper human condition stuff that we're touching on, but not in conjunction with a plot that is as massive as this, and not one that also gets into some of the deep mathematics that Keith is talking about, and like the theories of astrophysics and things of that nature. Not one that tries to do all of that. And so fans of the series are, of course, going to appreciate and laud that ambition and how cool that is. I just want to also point out, as being one of those fans, that it is almost literally insane to me now to think that a person believed they could do that.
Yeah. Is it any wonder that the series is unfinished?
Very good point.
There's things. I'm studying right now game design here in Japan, and there are things that they are teaching me over there, which reflects a little bit like both the corporate and the artistic mindset of Japanese video game industry. And there are some things that I'm learning there that when I try to apply to Xenosaga, I was thinking, Jesus Christ, Takahashi was really crazy for doing it.
Really crazy. Really crazy.
Yeah, well, he got really lucky in that he was like, for a while, he was under like the corporate auspices of like people who just let him do his thing, and as crazy as it is.
Yeah.
It's one of like the deep questions that I have of like, is this all like Takahashi and Xenosaga, or did they have like Kip Thorne on the side? You know, like in the movie Interstellar, or like, because the thing that I find mind blowing is on like the mathematics side, like we were talking about this a little bit in sort of like the pre-call, things like Hilbert space or whatever, like they're not the kind of thing that are like pop science or anything like that. Like there's like 10 people in the world that think about like Hilbert space, unless you go out and tell someone to look at Hilbert space, right? So like, how did it just organically happen when whoever was the script writers working on this game, that they just like automatically had a command of all these different things to even think about attempting to do this? I don't understand it.
Like, and even in Xenogears, from what I remember, didn't get that into like the sort of abstract mathematics stuff that you were talking about. So even in the context of Takahashi's own, body of work, it comes as a surprise if you're playing his games, in chronological order.
Yeah, for sure.
Because like we expect him to know about like religion and philosophy and stuff, but not this.
Right. It like you're saying, it's just that extra element where we already understood, I feel like, how ambitious and crazy this was based on just the philosophical religious references. But now we're adding some like deeply, deeply complicated mathematics and astrophysics to it. And it's just like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you trying to do this?
Yeah. Where does he get the time to learn about all this stuff even? Especially the math stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
that's why I'm just curious to know if he or Xenosaga or whoever, if they just happened to know about this stuff and then went about putting the pieces together, or if they were like, if it was more of a conscious decision, like, I've got this spiritual stuff, I want to have a mathematical basis, let me read up on the stuff. Like, I'm curious what the directionality was. Of
so like find an excuse to like put these things in.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
it's a little bit of everything, to be honest.
Probably.
Yeah.
They already knew about this stuff because they are personally interested in that. But at the same time, maybe while writing the script, they think about some concept that tangentially touches about, especially the mathematical stuff, and they say, okay, maybe we look into this to make sure that we get things right.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, real quick. Now that we've kind of gone through laying out the plot in the most basic terms possible, that was really great. Great job. That's awesome work, Keith, by the way. There are a couple of scenes, particularly at the end, and then also between Kanan and Voyager, kind of like that we didn't really get into in our last episode. So I wanted to give Kason a space really quick, if he wants to sort of like just give some thoughts or reactions or whatnot to those two scenes. So the Chaos Voyager part, and then the ending that we didn't quite have time to jump into.
So I really liked the Voyager arc line. Now, we mostly already explained it in the previous kind of in between games that we talked about. But it was good to see it resolved, and the way that it resolved, I thought, was really beautiful. The way that the way that it's what's his name? I want to say Kanan now. It's not Kanan. It's
Lactis?
Ziggy. The way that Ziggy kind of does it is first off, it's just brilliant. But second off, the way that we kind of see these testaments, the way that we see them kind of resolve and either come to terms with things or overstretch themselves beyond what they're capable of, I just thought they were really creative and really cool. So I did like the way that it ended, but I don't really have anything to say about it other than like that was fascinating, and it's really fun to see how each of these testaments kind of came to a point where they either screwed up too bad, and like he did, like Voyager, like reached for the true power of God and then realized it was actually the thou shalt surely die kind of thing. And then the Red Testament, how he kind of has his moment, as well as what's his name, Virgil. And I really like how a lot of that stuff turned out. But at the very end here, I did have some stuff like for the credit scenes, right?
Oh, we're at the very end of the... Okay.
Yeah, at the very end. This is stuff that we didn't really talk about much. Mm-hmm. The music is beautiful, by the way.
Oh,
but I do have just one kind of note as Cosmos is kind of coming back to Earth, basically. She's kind of got her arms out and she's just kind of like floating through space. But it's because I was wondering why. They showed the planet and then the moon and then a light source and then Cosmos. You get kind of like 4 kind of phases happening here. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting because she kind of passes in front of them on her way back to Earth. And for a brief moment there, as she is kind of joined up with the sun, and then you see the moon as it's kind of rim lit, I guess you could say, and it's forming something along the lines of the alchemical symbol for Mercury, which is the feminine symbol, the circle and the cross, with the Taurus kind of the half circle kind of right above it, right? And it shows that for just a second. And then she continues her move towards Earth. I don't know if this is intentional or not.
That's interesting, because keep going.
No, go ahead. Tell me your
thoughts. Because I was going to say, I mean, obviously, I never made the mercurial connection until you brought it up. But I mean, I always
alchemy, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it makes sense in the context of the game. But I always, that scene in particular is so such a blatant like homage to. Again, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yes, totally.
That's the overpowering thing, and also the fact that the Earth apparently has a ring around it now.
Is that just from all the space debris?
Well, we don't know. The
thing is, the thing. I mean, a lot of people say that Cosmos is supposed to be descending into Earth. I've never been 100% sure about that because it's not only a reference. Yeah, the thing is that. It's not only a reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey. I also saw it a little bit as a reference to Xenogears.
I mean, it would have to be.
So,
I think
interesting. So the different.
Yeah. The planet in Xenogears has the ring around it too.
That's the element that always threw me off a little bit. And especially now with the ending of the Xenoblade 3 DLC, where a lot of people say that that little thing is supposed to be Cosmos.
That's a whole other can of worms.
We'll get that.
But yeah, I mean, and this is just my stance on it. Like because that whole like post, all the cutscenes that happen after that fight with Zarathustra is so focused on returning to Lost Jerusalem.
That's what
I've always seen that planet, combined with the fact that in 2001 it is Earth. So I've always seen it as, it's supposed to be Lost Jerusalem, and the fact that it has this ring. Obviously, Takahashi was trying to suggest the Xenogears planet as well. And that's one of the things that I've always I wish that they had continued the series just to see where it would have gone, because was Takahashi trying to suggest that he's going to maybe do like a Xenogears-esque thing but set on Lost Jerusalem? Like that's what it suggests, but how does that make sense, or how would that even work?
Well, then we have to get there into the whole thing about whether Xenosaga was really meant to be like a stealth remake of Xenogears or not.
You'll never get a straight answer on that one, because there's
I know. because
it's kind of a hot button topic.
The thing is that, I mean, this is a theme that started off with Xenosaga itself before it came out, before episode 1 came out, and it's still going on 20 years later. It's like, to me, it's like, can we move on? Because obviously, personally, I got a little bit tired from it. Especially because there are, I mean, Keith, maybe you will try have arguments against this later, but there are things in the backstory of Xenogears that don't add up with Xenosaga itself, especially when it comes to Nephilim and Abel / Faye and Ellie. That to me that makes that impossible. At least without any without many major retcons that to me at least are beneath Takahashi.
Right. I see where you're going, but before we go there, Keith actually messaged real quick, said that he has some thoughts about Cosmos making the symbol for Mercury. I have some as well, but Keith, did you want to chime in here real quick?
Yeah. So it kind of combines what you all are saying, was that I also agree that was probably supposed to be Lost Jerusalem canonically, but evoking the Xenogears planet, I think. So I'm in that camp.
So it's like a mix.
Yeah, but what I think, again, like if I'm right about what sort of like the through line is of all these games and Xenogears, that it's about like human connection and being able to like interface with each other and love each other, etc. I think then it would fit nicely if you see Cosmos, who again just before that was kind of like telepathically communicating with Chaos, and basically saying like, like the universe like needs us as counterparts, like anima, animus, yin, yang, sacred feminine, sacred. Very good. So I think that would make, if the whole theme will eventually culminate in becoming whole, I think it makes sense to see Cosmos floating with a symbol of kind of like the divine feminine. That feels right.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's what's good about the Mercury, the symbol of Mercury in alchemy. It represents the mind and a state that can transcend death. Mercury as an element, it can shift between solid and liquid states, even just at room temperature. It's a very unique kind of metal in that regard. They used to call it quicksilver, at least in part for that reason. But also, it has some, similarities with the moon and things like that as well. So there's really good symbolism there. It's just beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, and it makes sense in the context of, because the ending of this game is, I mean, it's so for me, it's so emotionally powerful because so many horrible things. I mean, so many people have died. All these planets have disappeared. The UMN is not a thing anymore. It's
right.
And then, but they're they're going on to search for Lost Jerusalem to sort of maybe rebuild the universe. And it's there is this very palpable feeling of hope in the midst of all this insane chaotic things that are going on.
Yeah. Can you imagine if somebody destroyed any possibility of the internet ever functioning, how much everyone would hate them? And then they're just I'm helping. And they go on a plane to Jerusalem, if planes even work, but probably not. They charter their own little crop duster over the Atlantic to go back to Jerusalem to restart civilization. And everyone's just stop it. I hate you. You ruined everything. Okay. Real quick. One more thing. This is my last real note here, kind of at the end. First off, it says living without regrets. And then I wrote ... I have 1 billion regrets. So, that's a rough one. But this line, and this might prompt some discussion here. Shion says, if the future is predetermined, we have infinite paths to choose from. What does that mean? Can somebody explain that to me? She said, even if the future is predetermined.
This is a guess. Okay. So just for the backstory here again is, given what had happened at the end of the game, the heroes have put the universe into a very precarious position, which is what Wilhelm says earlier, because now the fail-safes are thrown out, or we're not doing the fail-safe. Eternal recurrence is not a thing. So you guys,
his arms cut off.
Yeah. You got like 15,000 years before the dissolution of the universe. You have now said, we got this, Chief. Right. So either you're going to figure it out, or you're going to collapse the entire universe. Right.
Yeah.
So what I think Shion is saying from this perspective is, like, even if that is the outcome, like, moment to moment, we have like infinite ways to like live in, like,
that makes sense.
I took it.
Okay,
we're gonna give it our best, and even if we don't make it, this still matters. Like,
kind of like the future is ours kind of thing.
Yeah,
perfect.
It's a little bit.
Well,
a little bit of a will to power sort of sentiment in that, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. At least in part because within Nietzsche's framework, you're never supposed to actually get to the end, right? The infinite is to be filled in between here, and is to be filled within the bridge, and not necessarily the end point itself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it as well when I first played it. And to be the thing is that the whole spiel from Shion about how the important thing is to live without regrets. I think that when I was talking about before about things that really had an impact in my life, that I think that speech was number one, because when I always from that point on, first I came to terms with the idea of eternal recurrence, which was something that fell flat for me when I first read about Nietzsche. It's like, okay, we're supposed to live the same life again and again, but if we don't remember our previous lives, why does it matter? That was the part that made it flat to me, and that speech made me, I think, understand it a little bit more. It's not about the idea that we're gonna be remembering our previous lives again and again, and that's either a boon or a condemnation, but rather that you have to make sure that you live your life in a way that when you look back to it, you shouldn't feel that you miss on something because of your own choices. Yeah. That's in that sense. I make the distinction between it's not the same thing to regret something and to lament something. Yeah. And I think that lamenting something, lamenting something is something that you that it was kind of not your fault, but you still wish it didn't happen. But regretting something is when you think that something that you should have done but you didn't, either for you just something you shouldn't, or for your own inaction. And that's something that I try to use for my own life. It's like, it's inevitable to lament things, but I'm going to try at least not to regret things.
Yeah, that's great. Very good. Really quickly, now that we've kind of touched on some of those things, David, you mentioned in our pre-call conversation how you felt like the ending of Xenosaga 3 was so perfect the execution of this ending tied things together in such a perfect way. And I wanted to get a little bit more detail about why you felt that way.
Yeah. Well, first off, I have to make a distinction. I don't mean the original plan of the entire series. I mean Shion's arc specifically, because something that I consider is that Xenosaga has it doesn't have a cliff. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger. It ends on an open ending. It's like, okay, whatever happens, it's up to the player's interpretation. So that's the point where I think that maybe Takahashi's vision really deviated from the original intent. But when it comes to Shion's specifically, I mean, everything wraps up so nicely that I find it hard to believe the idea that they had to change their vision so much that it's at the very least maybe not irrecognizable, but so far removed from the original intent that it's not the same thing anymore. And I find that difficult to believe, because it's not only that episode 3 has a satisfying ending, it's how the entire trilogy comes together, including episode 2, by the way, because there are things that are set up on episode 1 that get resolved throughout the entire series up to almost the very last moments from episode 3. Mm-hmm. And it's like they thought ahead so much and so deeply.
Yeah,
that's it's like when I finished the trilogy, I always thought that if I ever get to tell my own stories in video games after I graduate, that's how I kind of want to do things myself. Even though I know that it's completely crazy because Takahashi's mind is on a completely different level from mine.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's like thematically as well, because there are things about the idea of eternal recurrence that you can go back to episode 1 as well, and of course the plot itself is like the entire conflict between Ziggy and Voyager that they appear when Ziggy is first introduced, or even Kevin as well. I mean, plot-wise, there's one moment that I told you guys that I want to bring back to. Do you remember the scene before Cherenkov and tries to steal Cosmos' archetype? And there's this scene where he receives. Yeah, the thing is, when he receives the remote control that turns out to be faulty afterwards. I mean, when he receives it, and you see the hooded figure who gives it, it's Kevin. If you go back to that scene and you see that you can see that he's, his hair coming out from the hood, right. And it's recognizable as Kevin. He's like, oh my god, they thought this through to that level that you can even recognize a character just from a strand of his hair.
Let me add something to that, because I was gonna say, this is like one of the main reasons why I love replaying these games, is because they thought so far ahead and planned so many things out. One of my favorite, and this is such an inconsequential line in context, it's at the very beginning of episode 1, where she's on the Woglinde and she's servicing the Realians. This is right before Virgil shows up for the first time, and she makes an offhand comment to the person in charge of that lab that she really, when she first joined Vector, she really wanted to join 3rd Division because she really liked, she wanted to help out Realians like she was doing there. But they put her in 1st Division and she said, oh, there must have been a mistake with the paperwork. There was not a mistake with the paperwork. That was Kevin and Wilhelm manipulating things behind the scenes. Yeah. And it's only at the very end of episode 3 where that, in particular, when you first find out that Kevin is the Red Testament and he's been responsible for, basically every bad thing that's ever happened to her in her life. That's why I love Kevin as a villain, because once you realize who he is and just the implications of what he's done throughout the entire series, it's oh my god, there's it's such a subtle reveal, but you think about all the stuff that he must have had his hand in, and it's crazy. I love that.
Yeah, I want to double click on that with Kevin really quick, and actually the Realians, because these are a couple of points that I didn't quite get on first pass either. Part of the reason why Shion, because you might be saying why does Shion want to do anything with Realians? They're basically responsible for her massive trauma, with the murder scenes and all that sort of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So part of the reason why I think that she wants to work with Realians is also to kind of resolve these confused emotions that she has, with people like Cecily Cath and Fibronia as good Realians, and monsters that Kevin created. Mm-hmm. But what I think is something that is really interesting, and I caught it when I watched the scene when it's one of the Beach of Nothingness scenes where Mizrahi is speaking. Oh no, sorry, it's in the Shion consciousness simulation scene when Momo is talking to Joachim. Now that I understand what I think the plot is, he is saying that part of the reason, remember he's saying I want to create a Realian like you, because it could be you'll be the hope of your kind. He's saying this nice stuff to Momo when she feels like she's recognized by him. Remember that scene in the Shion imaginary world? Everybody remember that scene? Mm-hmm. part of what Joachim then says is like that the whole reason why he's creating Realians is that he thinks that they can help the universe. He doesn't say it expressly, but like because they have some aspect of shared consciousness, they have human-like consciousnesses, but they're tied more strongly together in humans. Joachim is actually building Realians to try to fight against that spiritual entity. That's the whole reason.
Okay. Yeah.
Why he's building Realians. I missed that completely on my first place.
I never thought of that, but I think you're exactly right.
David, any last thing you wanted to add about your feelings on the ending and how it wraps everything up?
Well, the only part where I can get why people get a little bit mad about the ending is about, especially Kevin's supposed redemption at the end, whether he really loved Shion or not. And because, and even if he did he really deserve that redemption that the narrative gives to him? You know, the whole thing with, that he somehow put 2 petals from the flowers that Shion was taking care of as a child inside the pendant, and when Cosmos shows them to her, they have like this last conversation in this void. And I mean, it's hard not to get yourself invested in that speech, especially because Leah Sargent and Yuri Lowenthal, they are magnificent in this game.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you stop and think about it, it's like, does this really work? I mean, for me, it kind of did, but I can see people having problems with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
was just going to.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
So
sorry, Aidan, you go.
Okay, so like the testaments are like really cool because so they all kind of like get their own like resolution. What's really cool about the testaments, like name wise, besides like the obvious like biblical reference of like Old Testament, New Testament, is like somebody's will and testament. So like they have like a desire or like a wish they can't really get over, and all of the testaments get to fulfill this wish. Voyager gets ultimate power, but it destroys him. Virgil like kind of gets to reconcile with Feb. It destroys him. Kevin gets to save Shion. It destroys him. Albedo gets to reunite with Junior. It destroys him. So I think that's like, I think Kevin doing that thing at the end that he wanted to do and having it destroy him really still fits in with everything else. I don't feel like it's out of pocket. I feel like it's definitely part of the whole theme that they were trying to do with the testaments.
Yeah, I was going to just to add to that, like, and this is in no way trying to justify anything that Kevin did, because obviously Kevin is like a huge monster, abusive, horrible person. But, you know, I've always thought that you could read his character as like he genuinely does love Shion. He does somehow think that he is doing the right thing, even though to us and to really anyone with a degree of sanity, he seems insane. But like, you know, saying that just because he does all these horrible things doesn't mean that somewhere in his cold, blackened heart, he doesn't, in a way, still love Shion and want to somehow like what's best for her. I don't know. Like I don't think the two are mutually exclusive.
I agree with what you're saying, TJ.
Okay.
And that is more or less my takeaway from the resolution for Kevin here. Mm-hmm. Like, I can see why people took from that there was some sort of intention behind this scene. This makes... This concludes some sort of redemption arc for Kevin. I didn't look at it that way. Like, I don't think what he did excuses or that there's any sort of intention being put forth here by the writers that in defying Wilhelm in the end, this somehow excuses or makes it all okay, all of the abuse that he put on Shion before this, all the manipulation, all the bad stuff. I don't really see it as a redemption in that sense. As much as it is that there were points, like key points in Kevin's life, where Shion did sort of pierce through his ice wall a little bit. And back on Milsha, at the end of that, he resolved back onto his original worldview, where like she was sort of like picking through it, and he was for a moment considering what she was saying, and doubting his own sort of like worldview.
Right.
But in the end, because of what happens there on Milsha, he sort of like gets more resolved on it.
Right.
And then now in the end of the game, when she makes the choice not to go with him, it almost like fully pierces through that wall that she had originally been picking at as a child. And now he's seriously doubting it. And in the key moment, what he does is a very, very, very big thing. Like his resistance of Wilhelm and his attempt to help the party, while it does nothing to undo all of the bad stuff he did before, that is an absolutely monumental action to have taken to push the universe into this now, okay, we're going to find some other way to save it, right? Like, we have to have defeated Wilhelm, and we have to have defeated Yuriev, and gotten these people out of the way to even get to a place where we can consider some alternate method, which I think Udo is also involved in trying to communicate with the lower, domain here, and sort of like work with the people here to find a solution to this. Now that those guys are out of the way, we can actually get to working on that. That is made possible in large part because of Kevin. So that's a monumentally amazing thing that he helped accomplish. But
to your point, Mike, they actually include like Kevin's like musical theme in the final boss theme.
Yeah.
So you can hear. So like it starts like at the very beginning of the game, you have like Prelude to the Tragedy, which is like the piece that plays when Mictum is getting nosified and all that. And then like when Kevin's like telling his backstory, there's like Mother, I Miss You. Well, you can hear that motif in Promised Pain, which is the final boss theme.
Yeah.
So
I never noticed that.
Oh, I didn't pick on that.
Yeah. So I just to conclude my thought on this, I don't think they're trying to redeem Kevin from the sins of his past, as much as they are giving him a role, like a piece of the responsibility for moving us in the direction we need to avoid these faulty solutions to the rescuing of the universe, which is something that could not have been done without him, right? So that doesn't redeem him in the sense that it makes it okay what he did. It redeems him in the sense that even somebody that messed up is still a human being with really, really complicated reasons for what they're doing. And that we don't need to give up on people. There is still a possibility that you can reach that human soul in there, and that it's not as black and white as a lot of times we like to think it is.
Right. And let me just say, this whole conversation just made me think like I'm seeing more of more similarities between Shion and Kevin than I ever have before, because
me too.
Both of them, like, Shion was like, one of the only survivors of the Milchen conflict. Kevin was the survivor of the Mictum disaster. Kevin manipulated Shion into doing what he wants, and Wilhelm did the same thing to Kevin when he was young. Right. So like Shion could have become just another part in that pattern. And, in fact, she almost does. But, thankfully that didn't happen. And then, Kevin in his own way almost reenacted in his own way, Shion deciding to go back with the party, after, that whole scene. His defeat of Wilhelm is his equivalent to that. And Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, I just want to build off of that a little bit by saying I agree 100%, Mike and TJ, with what you're saying. And I actually, like everyone, I didn't really jive with Kevin much during the playthrough, like personality-wise. But now that we're speaking about this now, I realize that is actually much more of like a pivotal scene than I think, people might originally think. Because to your point, I'll say what you said, Mike, in simpler words. I think what happens there is maybe the first genuine act of love that Kevin ever shows towards Shion, of real love.
Absolutely.
Of basically saying that, like, I might not believe in this vision of the future, but I believe in you, and I want you to have that change of the future, even if I'm not part of it.
I was going to say that, like him killing Wilhelm is his sort of tacit endorsement of, like, their way is better. Like, I realize now, and even though it's like, I've wasted basically my entire life following Wilhelm, like, at least at the end of my life, I can realize, like, I can somehow. So it's almost like he doesn't get redemption for, like, all the terrible things he did, but it's like an internal sort of, for himself, he can go to his grave knowing that, for himself, he's been redeemed almost, if that makes sense.
To the point
that's
David,
the without regrets line.
The point that David made earlier. Living life without regretting, the lamentation versus regret thing he's talking about. This single act, I think, will allow Kevin to live, to leave this life not regretting it, despite the fact that he very well could have, considering I wasted my whole life, like you just said, I wasted my whole life on this idea of saving the universe, and it was wrong.
Yeah.
But
and afterlife.
With this act, now I don't have to regret it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Also, not as too much of a defense of Kevin, but I think it's also maybe germane to note that that Wilhelm completely misled him, because, again, only Wilhelm and Chaos really know what's going on here. The whole reason why Kevin, because you might, if you think about this, like, Kevin's motivation, even knowing what we know from just a gameplay perspective, kind of doesn't make sense. If the whole plan is eternal recurrence and, like, what has happened is going to happen again, the whole reason why Kevin wanted to work with Wilhelm to do whatever is because of all the horrible tragedy that happened with him and his mother, and he wants to reset the universe so that doesn't happen. But if it's all going to happen again, that makes no sense. So the point is
that's a good point.
That if you notice that in those conversations where Wilhelm sort of recruits Kevin, Wilhelm doesn't lie, but he omits. Like, Wilhelm basically says, like, I got to do this eternal recurrence thing. And Kevin, like, doesn't quite get it. He's kind of like, oh, yeah, like, I want to take things back, and then we'll make things better this time around. And, like, Wilhelm's like, yeah, sure, that's a beautiful idea, man.
And he pats him on the head. Yeah, very cute.
So I think part of what Kevin was doing was almost like, before he has this epiphany, is like, yes, I may be doing all of this horrible stuff, but I think he still was doing it for kind of his mother and Shion still, in a kind of twisted love. Because I think at one point he believed, even if I'm horrible to her now and I'm manipulating to her now, it's not going to matter, because the whole point is I want to reset the universe to a new universe, and we'll do it right next time.
What's great?
Yeah.
That in that sense, Shion and Kevin kind of, like, cross. They make kind of they cross the intentions a little bit. That Shion, when Udu earlier was speaking with her, Udu said, hey, would it be worth reliving your entire life just for this one moment? And Shion's like, yes, please, yes, like, huge, yes. Whereas if you talk to Kevin, it's like, is life worth it if you have to go through your thing? And he's like, no, it's not. And he wants to change it, whereas Shion wants to just live it again forever and ever and ever, and she'd be in perfect bliss. And then at some point, there's a switch that happens where they're both actually wrong. Like, it seems like those are the only two options, but they're both wrong in that there's a third path, right? There's a future void of either side of this where you don't have to relive either the good or the bad, right? And that they kind of need to learn about. But it's very interesting that Kevin's intention is to change things next time, and Shion's intention is to keep things the same. And then they kind of, pull off this little bit of a switch there that leads to this third way, which is really good, very interesting. And I too noticed a lot of the similarities between Kevin and Shion, especially in the I can understand both of them.
Right.
I can understand both of them very well, and why Kevin would do the things he did and seek power, think that power is the only thing that can change the things next time, right? Yeah. And as well as Shion, to just seek comfort and to just want that so bad. I understand both of those so well.
Yeah, and I mean, it takes incredible narrative skill, again, to give Takahashi his credit, like, in order to understand someone who is as horrible of a person as Kevin is. Right. To be able to not sympathize, I was going to say sympathize, but that's not the right word, but to sort of like, I understand why he's doing what he's doing. Yeah. As horrible as it is, I get why he went down that path.
Totally.
Okay.
Well, just one last thing, because although this is a little bit more on the graphic side, but it blew my mind when I first saw it. Xenosaga 3 at the end has the best crying face I've seen in my entire life in a video game. It's in the final conversation between Jin and Shion. And oh my God. I mean, the way that they draw their face, I mean, Leah Sargent's performance also helps, but I mean, her face is red, her eyes are swollen. It's not only that she cries ugly. And a PS2 game has made it better than any other game that came afterwards. Yeah. And it was like, oh my God, whoever had to draw the textures from Shion's face in this scene, I hope they got erased, because oh my God.
I mean, the whole like end of the game. I think I mentioned this in our episode 2 discussion, but the whole end of the game, like from when Shion decides to go with Kevin, just makes me cry like a baby. Like, because that happens, and then Alan does his thing, and then Shion comes to her senses, and then Kevin has his moment of, I won't say redemption, but whatever we want to call it. They kill,
cutting off someone's hand.
Cutting off his hand, and then they destroy Zarathustra, and then Jin dies. It's like Shion cannot catch a break. I just want to give her a hug. Right. and then Alan, like, we didn't mention this, but there's the scene where like Alan picks up the machine gun and like just smashes the Gnosis. He's like, I will protect Shion, and it's like, oh my God, it's like there's no stopping. This is like one of my favorite endings of like any game I've ever played.
Yeah.
Like,
well, to be honest, I mean, to me, well, and I guess that to me the entire last act of Xenosaga 3 is not only the ending; it's pretty much ever since the revelation that Shion was the one who summoned the Gnosis into the lower domain. I mean, to me, from that point on, Xenosaga is one big moment after another, nonstop. It's like, and either it's either a very shocking plot revelation, a very deep and emotional character moment, or both.
Right, and
one after another. It was nonstop.
I think part of that was by necessity, because. And like obviously they had to prematurely end the series. And I do feel like, as much as I love the ending of this game, don't get me wrong, I do feel like a lot of this sort of like it, and I'm not saying it's this bad, but it almost sort of reminds me of like the disc 2 of Xenogears, because it's like one thing happens and then the other thing happens, and then it's just they have to keep going. They they have no time to like stop and take a breath. Like the whole, like when they're on Mictum and they encounter like Margulis and Pellegrini the whole time, and it's like, I applaud them for like wrapping up all the arcs of these secondary characters, but like it seemed like they were in like a time crunch. Like they had to like just wrap everything up probably quicker than they wanted to.
Well, luckily it was a time crunch of, we have too much material that is well thought out, and
that's true.
Instead of a time crunch of like, oh crap, how are we going to do this? We've got to create new things out of nowhere to try and make everything work. Instead, it's like, we just got a ton of dope stuff. Just put it all in.
Yeah. And I'd much rather have it be that than the alternative.
That's why they made the plot of this game. They wanted to wind things back into Eternal Recurrence, so they'd have enough time, or making the game.
Just to be clear, to me, that's not a bad thing at all. Again, I mean, I was enjoying every second of it. It's like, yes, more please. Yeah. And at the end, I was like, oh my God, this has been.
Yeah. I certainly enjoyed it as well, for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to shine a little bit more of a light on that moment you mentioned with Alan, because I think it's funny because he sort of, in my opinion, becomes like the herald of that kind of inspirational message that I had mentioned earlier of like, the smallest thing, even in your own, because like he is the perfect representation of that. He is totally unseen for almost the entirety of the entire series. And then in this moment, like, I guess I would argue that moment, like if you think about things in terms of this overall idea of like wills or consciousnesses being able to come together or reject each other, that moment where, Shion and Kevin are fighting the rest of the party is like the schism moment. And it's Alan that comes in and sort of like rights the ship and puts everything on the right trajectory towards the end of the game. So it's like
I was going to say, like, Alan, you could very easily argue that Alan is the most important character in the series.
Very much so. He's the one that opens that third way. He's the one that makes it all possible.
Yeah, because like his one act sort of creates this domino effect that leads to everything that happens afterwards. Like without that, nothing else would happen.
And it was an act of love. So it's like love enters the scene, like in a way. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
I really like how they kind of made Alan like kind of like a Christ-like figure in this scene, where he's like willing to take on the burdens of Shion. And this is even further like reinforced by Cosmos coming in to help. In like episode 1, Cosmos is like, relinquish your pain unto me, and we see her and like all of this like Christ-like imagery. And there's also a scene as well with Alan. I believe it's I don't know if it's on the Durandal or where it is, but Alan's like sitting with Chaos, and he's talking about Shion and her not willing to share her pain with other people. And so I feel like it's like extremely fitting for Alan to come in as like this, this regular guy to like take on the burdens of his friend, and also for Cosmos to join him in that.
Gosh, I never do this until you just said what you just said. I was like, what does the name Alan mean, right? It's just such a common name, at least in the United States. First off, it means handsome, which, okay.
I did not know that.
The second thing it means is little rock. So Alan means little rock. And if we're going to make the Christ reference, right, then you're going to say that he is a small Christ figure, but he is something along the lines of a little rock, right? The little rock that starts the avalanche, you could say, something like that. I don't know if that was intentional. I just figured I'd look it up.
Well, with these games, you have to ask. Because,
exactly.
It very well could be.
Well, there's also the thing that Alan maybe is the character that resembles the player more. I know that was my case at the very least.
Right.
By the end, I think yes. At first, it's like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to turn it over to Aidan for a minute. We haven't heard as much from you as I would have liked up to this point.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, it's hard for me to find somewhere to jump in.
It's not on you. It's on us. We're talking too much. We're not giving you the space. So I want to give it to you now. Is there anything that, along the thread of what's been talked about so far, that you've wanted to add to but haven't had a chance to? And if not, there are so many things that you've sent me in personal messages that I thought would be really good to bring up. Is there something there that you'd love to touch on?
I really do want to talk about like the chaos and Christ stuff, specifically because I believe chaos represents the like a Nestorian idea of Christ.
Very good.
Instead of like a Gnostic idea, and where you have a physical like person, but also a divine element. So it's like a separate thing. Now, as far as I understand, this is like not like accurate to how it was taught. I believe it's like a misinterpretation of the original idea. Nestorius was this guy in Greece. I don't know that much about it. I've read a little bit into it, but not like that deeply. But where he is, he's basically saying Christ has two natures, a human nature and a divine nature. now Xenosaga kind of uses that as sort of like a like where you have like kind of just like puts it into the plot to where like Chaos is this character, but he's also that divine aspect of Christ, and Christ, the man, is just Christ. So Chaos kind of is Jesus, but he's not. He's more like the divine element of Christ. He performed Christ miracles in the game, as far as we know in the story. And a really cool thing too is in the end of episode 1, when the Elsa is burning up in the atmosphere, and you have Cosmos on the bridge of the ship, and she goes into blue eyes mode, and Chaos's hands start to glow. And what's really cool about his hands glowing, and I believe he even fixes like a terminal in episode 3 with his hands glowing in I can't remember when it happens, but it also happens in episode 3. But like the hands glowing is like a reference to Acts, where like the apostles have like they're invoking the Holy Spirit. So I thought that was like a really cool idea. I think that's just what makes Xenosaga really cool, is like this synthesis of ideas. It's not just one idea. It's like a few ideas that are kind of blended in together to create like this soup of things. And what's really cool about the hand thing as well is like you can kind of like take a look, you can kind of like get an idea as like the story is like, you could kind of read it as like, oh well, like this is like energy from the universe, or like a thermal energy from the universe, this invocation of the divine spirit or a wave or of some kind. And you can kind of think of it like oh well, were the miracles in Xenosaga's time, were they like used with this energy from like the universe? Is that like part of like the spiritual degradation that the game is kind of like talking about, like in terms of, because he's imbued with like this power of anima and like all this other stuff. So I wasn't sure what you guys thought about all that, but that's one thing I wanted to say.
There's a quick analogy I wanted to make really quick to go along with your soup point there. That the Xenosaga is this soup of like different ideas, kind of like a bunch of different ingredients put into one soup. And there are some plates or dishes out there where if you take one element of the dish in isolation, it might feel a little strange on the palate. But the intention of that plate is for you to combine that flavor with the other flavors on the plate. And so Kason and I talked a couple of times throughout the series about certain points in this game where something tasted a little weird on the palate, so to speak, right? Like just this based on my religious background or what have you, like that just is too weird. It's too out there for me to really take that seriously in the context of the story here. However, there is, I think, a little bit of tasting an ingredient of the soup in isolation rather than with the whole. Because now that you add the context of this sort of like dual nature of Christ and how this is like a reference to a real, a real idea, all of a sudden you go, oh, wait a minute. It's not that the ingredient tastes weird. It's that I didn't understand what the reference was in the first place. So I am looking at this ingredient, this like funky taste on my palate with only my own background or my own understanding, my own religious education to fall back on to put that into a place that makes any sense or that works for me. But that is exactly Takahashi's stated reason for making these games going back to Xenogears. if I come out and talk to these young kids about these Jungian philosophies, and they won't listen to me.
Yeah.
So I hide it inside of this mecha anime series. and if they're interested, they can pursue that and, learn this stuff on their own. And even still, there are moments, having known that that's the reason, I still am not quite, I think, trained enough to go, that tastes weird on the palate, let me do some research. Instead of, that tastes weird on the palate, I don't like that.
Right. This is inherent with the idea of like breaking something down, which is what we're often trying to do. Is the idea is that you've got this whole soup that's a billion things, and what Mike and I are trying to do is like, okay, well, here's the ingredient that does this, and we're trying to break it down and into its constituent elements, and say, well, here's the potatoes, here's the meat, here's the stuff, right, and trying to analyze it, right, which is what we typically do, and often. Those moments, right, that kind of lead to you kind of realizing that, oh my gosh, you're tasting all of the things separately instead of together the way that it's supposed to be. It's also important to note on the Nestorian claim that specific view of Christianity was very popular in the East. The Persians, the Chinese, even Christians, were mostly Nestorians. So that's how the church kind of grew up until, I don't know, I think that the Nestorians in China kind of around 1500 or so, they kind of stopped being a thing. Christianity stopped being a thing in China as much. But it's interesting to note, especially given Takahashi being a Japanese person, that specific interpretation of Christ that made its way to the East so many years ago is maybe one that he felt drawn to as well.
Yeah,
I wanted to say that. Yeah, I mean, this Nestorian nature, that's something that really helped me, Aidan. So thank you, because to me, the moment where Xenosaga, in the religious aspect, felt like it was going a little bit off the cliff, was to see literal Jesus on screen.
I know it's no one's ever been able to pull off a depiction of Christ.
Is there any other game that has a literal Jesus as
I don't
a character?
know. Yeah. Well, probably as a joke.
Yeah, that's the thing. To me, it was a little bit
joke.
Well, yeah.
Well, I'm glad
I was gonna say that. Well, just 1 second. Is that
Go ahead.
well, the thing, my case, and you said that for you, it was seeing like a robot, Mary Magdalene, to me that didn't really bother me, because it was so out there, so crazy, that it was like to remove from the original source for me to be weirded out. So to me, I describe it as a weird, uncanny valley effect. Because seeing Jesus represented on screen, it was so close to the like traditional representations on Jesus, especially. I mean, I come from Spain, one of the most infamously Catholic countries on earth. So obviously, I've seen imagery like that throughout my childhood all the time, and that was like a little bit too close to home for me to be like. I mean, it didn't ruin the story or anything, but it maybe got a little bit like, Takahashi, maybe you went a little bit too far here.
Yeah, but how is a Japanese person supposed to know that depictions of Christ are very difficult on the palate for Western people, And he probably did know. I'm just saying it's not as ingrained to him as it has been to us.
And that's the point that I wanted to make. The point that I wanted to make was this tastes weird on the palate to Western trained Christians. But you have like the Eastern Orthodoxy, which is has a lot of really different ways of looking at this. And then, of course, the Gnostic views. And to me...
And the Nestorians.
Well, to me, you have this sort of like... If we're just looking like geographically, you have this place where the East and the West meet in sort of like where the Eastern Orthodox existed. and you see this blending of the two in a lot of the teachings of the Eastern Orthodoxy and how it's different from the West. And so this is stuff that Takahashi was studying as a Japanese person. He's looking at like almost the full landscape of philosophy and religion, not just the one that we who felt this tasted weird on the palate came from. And so I guess what I'm realizing in what Aidan's point there about the Nestorian view, of the divine nature versus the human nature of Christ is,
right.
I still need to get better at when something comes across as being weird, looking at that as an opportunity to expand my understanding of the full landscape here that he was using, the full landscape of colors, I guess we could say, that he's painting with, rather than my limited one from my very particular Western trained view of Christianity.
And I would say that specifically Takahashi, if there's anyone who deserves that approach, it's him. I don't think that everything weird you have to like take seriously. But when someone like Takahashi, who's just smart and talented, and he's given us so much, when he does something weird, then it's like, well, maybe he should have by this point earned our trust to like, maybe we should look into this. Maybe we're the ones not understanding it as well. But I don't think that should always be a rule, I guess.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you guys brought
There's some
this up.
stuff that's just weird.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought this up and called back to the conversation you had in the last episode, because this, I think, is the one area where my opinion completely changed from first playthrough to second playthrough. You might remember when we did the podcast for Xenosaga 2, I had mentioned, because I hadn't yet gone through it again, that this was something that I didn't like, was that, Xenogears had this wealth and tapestry, and then it was kind of progressively becoming like more narrowly religious. Because I remember when I first played it, I had that same experience. I grew up in a catechism, etc. And when that happened, you see the scene where like Jesus is on the mount with like chaos or whatever, and I was like, oh my, is it Jesus? Like, oh come on, right? Like I had that kind of like like reaction, right? But now on this kind of playthrough, I actually really, really appreciate it in exactly the way that you guys are talking about it now, and seeing it as, no, that's not the Jesus that I grew up with. This is like an entirely different presentation of it that actually has built in it a beautiful message that ties with the current characters. So to go into this a little bit, I think it's important to understand the relationship between this Jesus, Chaos, Yeshua, and Maria or Mary. So as I understand it, which I think is correct, is Jesus has no actual divine power. He's just a man. He's just a charismatic teacher. And Chaos is born with this ability to potentially self-destruct the universe. And it's through Jesus's teachings that Chaos and Mary want to come up with another, to not use Chaos as the self-destructive. So it's like, so a human person in this case, the human Jesus, is able to, through his compassion and connection, to help to guide the deity in a sense towards light, which is again a very
sort of like powerful idea right there.
I like that a lot, because I've always like thought that like, oh, Jesus and Chaos must be like the human Jesus must be wanting to do the same thing that Chaos is. I've never looked at it as like Chaos using Jesus to find this other path. I like that a lot.
When it shows Christ, Chaos is very attentive. Chaos isn't like, ooh, everyone thinks he's doing the miracles, but secretly I am.
Yeah,
he's this guy's legit, right? Like you see his facial expression. He sees hope in Christ, who the game just presents as just like
that's a good point. Yeah.
And then it's not that we have to get into the too much plot details, but then based on that, I think there's some sort of ticking time element in the ancient days where like Chaos's failsafe is going to erupt at some point. So that's when like Mary separates Chaos's power into the anima relics and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
That's what happens there. Okay. And then that ties into Lactus and Wilhelm and everything, because what Kanan is really doing, actually, which I was not, I just thought he was observing or something like that. Kanan's actual job was working for Wilhelm to identify people who have the power to resonate with the anima relics, because Wilhelm needs that to pair with the anima relics, and they're kind of like originally it was the disciples that had that the power was
12. Yeah.
So
makes sense.
And I also kind of want to further expound a little bit on the Christ thing a little bit even more, but I've got to talk about Childhood's End if that's fine.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I want to say yes because I really want to hear this, but I will put a spoiler tag here for Childhood's End. Though
Okay.
If you're a person who like wants to understand the references that inspired Tetsuya Takahashi, you definitely should have read Childhood's End. Do it immediately. But yeah, I'll put a spoiler tag here. I'll tell you where you should skip forward to. I guess I'll try to. It's hard to do that for audio only. I can put it on the screen in the video, so I'll try to put it in the description for those listening audio only. I know I've been bad about that in the past, so I apologize. Go ahead.
Oh, did you say go?
Do it.
Yes, go for
it. Okay. So the big thing with Childhoods and the big like reveal in that book is that the guardians or these beings that were supposed to guide humanity into this greater purpose or collective unconscious thing is that they kind of looked demonic. And that's kind of like the reveal of this whole book. And what I really like about Xenosaga is that it kind of like has an inversion of that, where the guide isn't the demonic figure, but it's the Messiah instead. And so, like, I really thought this was kind of like a Childhood's End thing when they kind of revealed, that Jesus was kind of involved in all of this. And so that's kind of like a more like expounded upon reading of like, in addition to like the Nestorian stuff, like that, Christ and chaos were trying to guide humanity towards like a way forward into the future, but ultimately they had to separate his powers.
Yeah, that's a really interesting read. I won't continue talking about Childhood's End because that could just go on for freaking ever. But
maybe we'll leave that where it is, and people who know
Yeah.
can
exactly.
think about it.
Watch your Xenogears thing. You talk about Childhood's End.
Did I don't even remember. It's been so long. There's been so many episodes. I don't even remember what we freaking talked about back then.
That was 3-4 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would like to say that a couple of my first year in the school, they gave us as an assignment to read a sci-fi novel, and I took that as an opportunity to finally read Childhood's End, and the parallels with Xenogears and Xenosaga. I was like, okay, so Udu and the Wave of Existence were inspired by the Overmind, I think. So
yes,
it was like really revelatory.
Right.
Yes,
totally. Okay. Let's pivot here real quick because Keith wanted to talk about some of the mathematics that inspired Xenosaga, and I have been dying to hear about this. So let's move into that now.
Actually, we actually talked about a lot of it already, so I'm trying to think of
the Hilbert and Real Imaginary stuff.
To be honest, that goes a little bit above my pay grade. That's not my specialty, but Hilbert waves and Hilbert fields have to do with the. Okay, here's an area where we can delve into. So have you guys heard of the term like mathematical realism versus like mathematical fictionalism, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Yeah. Basically, the difference between is mathematics just sort of something that we humans have come up with as like a best way to represent what's going on, or is like the universe like actually mathematics, like in its fundamental form, right? Like almost like a Platonic ideal sort of situation.
Yeah, that pre-exists, that predates the universe itself, right?
Exactly. So obviously, everything that I was saying kind of at the top of the conversation is definitely kind of leaning into this sort of like mathematical realism kind of view of the universe, the imaginary number space, the real number space, etc., which I think is like a fascinating way to tie sort of like spiritual concepts to something that's somewhat tethered to like physics. And here's, again, this is an area where I'm not an expert in it, and like very few people are, and it's still being actively developed. But an area where this crosses over into is in like the science of consciousness. People like Christoph Koch, who work with Francis Crick, like Watson and Crick DNA guys, right? Doing all these experiments into sort of the science of consciousness, like just that's like a huge problem in all of these kind of visions of the future, these transhumanist visions of the future, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't have a definition of consciousness, how do you know if I want to put myself in another body or a robot body? How do you
measure it
if you don't have like some kind of quantifiable metric of consciousness?
Yeah.
So a lot of kind of what's going on in this game with sort of like Momo and that whole scene, you know, inside her subconscious domain and how it relates to the the universal unconscious domain. So what Xenosaga has done here is kind of created this sort of fascinating like layered approach where like a normal person exists in the real space, but then their consciousness kind of touches the imaginary space, and then kind of below that is the universal unconsciousness. And the idea that I liked, especially in the Momo scenes and the general like dive scenes, are how any individual person can be like a gateway into the universal unconscious, because we're all kind of like worlds in and of ourselves, and in our like truest form we're part of that. So I just find that to be like a fascinating way to sort of, through a veneer of kind of mathematics, create this kind of like consistent view of what like how consciousness might actually relate to the structure of the universe. And then this crosses over into quantum mechanics a little bit. And again, here's where I'm going to go a little hand wavy. Basically, one of the big problems in mathematics that you probably all are familiar with, because it's kind of like it's reached pop culture a little bit. Like there's no unified theory. There's like problems.
Right.
You got like the quantum stuff and then like the classical stuff, and they kind of break down in the extremes. When you look at things like black holes, you know, this theory says it goes this way and this theory says it goes that way. So like we just don't quite have it. And consciousness actually kind of centers in this. You know, this is where people like Roger Penrose are relevant, right? You know, where one of the big debates right now is consciousness a fundamental part of the universe or not? Because your view of things like quantum mechanics becomes very relevant. Like if you assume that quantum mechanics is like, because in any system you have to start with something, you have to have an axiom, right? You know, like these are the self-evident things that we're starting with, and then we're going to build our whole system, right? So it becomes very important of like, what are those axioms? And then you get different systems. So one of the issues that's right now, I was just watching a dialogue with Penrose and someone else about this, where
still good on that.
If you assume that consciousness is like literally like a force, like gravity, like it's part of everything, you know, like this pen. It's
an ontological primitive, right?
Yeah, exactly. If it's an ontological primitive, if you assume that as an axiom, then some of the wild craziness of quantum mechanics can actually sort of be derived from that and make sense.
Yeah.
But if you try to go the other way, it's kind of more perilous, but it seems almost kind of crazy or too mystical to say that like consciousness is part of the fabric of reality. But so anyway, I'm not going into like numbers here. I'm talking about more like mathematical ideas. But this idea is obviously, you can see obviously which way the Xenosaga world is going with this, right? That like consciousness like is like a fundamental aspect of reality, and the universe, you know, is trying to know itself through its interactions. Udo is observing this, and people are observing each other to try to figure out how to learn more about the collective self through the individual components and all this kind of stuff. So again, I'm being a little bit hand wavy here, because if we were to try to go into the depths of this, it just quickly spirals into mathematical madness.
What I love about that, though, is that suggests that there is some way in which we humans, with our consciousness, with what we have here in the lower domain, that we have something in common with the higher order domain, and that is consciousness just in general. That Udo is an observer in a similar way that we are observers, and that Udo has a consciousness, a level of consciousness similar to what we have. It's just, you know, maybe, but they touch, right? They touch, and there's a way in which you know, humans are similar to or whatever might be above, right?
Yeah, that has of course the echoes the Gnostic ideas of like as above, so below, as without.
Sure.
And
then the one and the many, right? Where the one is the higher order, but the many is the lower domain.
I'm glad that you said that, because that's another like very, very specific sort of mathematical idea that's implicit into the Xenosaga world, which is the levels of infinity, right?
Yes, that's right. We talked about it in Xenogears a little bit.
Yeah, it even worked into Cherenkov's plot. Even remember, like when he had like the Aleph symbol on his head in the spiritual conditioning?
That's right. Yeah,
that actually related to that. I forget how, so we won't go into it. But long story short is this is an idea that's obviously when even just to say the upper domain that is positing this idea of like a higher dimensional plane. And this is just like a fascinating thing that we can go into for a little bit. That just like you can say a set of 5 things is you definitely bigger than a set of 2 things, you can just as precisely say the same thing about different levels of infinity. And this is tied to what's called cardinality. And usually like Hebrew letters are used to indicate them, like Aleph, Aleph 0, Aleph 1, Aleph 2. And that was the symbol, I think, that was on Cherenkov's head. Yeah. So to give everyone a concrete example of this, because you might go, hey, infinity is infinity. How can you say some infinity is strictly bigger than some other infinity, right?
Right.
Well, you do it by analyzing properties of that infinity. So one such property is something called density, right? If you think of the countable numbers, like 0, 1, 2, 3, if you think of any 2 of them that are adjacent to each other, you cannot slam a new one in the middle of it. It is not dense. There is nothing between 0 and 1, even though it's infinite. But in the real number line, if it's 1.0 and 1.1, no matter how granular you get with that, you can always pick one right in between. It's dense, right? So that's one way to show that it's strictly bigger than other infinities. So this idea of the level of infinities is worked into the background of Xenosaga's plot, but is also very relevant to underpin the Kabbalah, for example. This is built into the very notion of the tree of life, right? God is so infinite that a human being can't attend to it. But if I can divide God into these sort of 10 aspects, I can kind of try to resonate with each one of them. And it's not blasphemous to do that because I can still divide infinity and you still get infinity. So it's cool.
So, how do you even come up with this stuff, dude? Like for real?
No sleep to delve into this, but we had mentioned this last time, but there's this book that I recommend everyone reads by David Foster Wallace called Everything and More. That's about the mathematics of infinity and how everyone who's tried to wrestle with this idea of infinity, like a lot of the mathematicians basically just went completely insane, to your point. Yeah. Okay, one other area where it's not quite mathematics, but bioengineering is relevant. I think you were talking. Oh, it was in the Shion scene. Do you remember when everyone was in Shion's sort of subconscious and kind of doing all that stuff? Yeah. And then you were talking about parts theory, Kaysen, right? Like psycho.
Oh yes, internal family systems, and yeah, that.
Okay, so it's a little bit of a tangent, but hopefully you find it interesting. A project that I'm working on now that's related to Alzheimer's disease might have something to say on the nature of consciousness and this kind of idea that you kind of had with parts theory, because I kind of agree with you. Where, to go back to Xenogears, you might remember like basically 10 characters in Xenogears are the same character. You know, it's like he's got total personalities and incarnations, etc. Right. But if you remember when Shetan is kind of drilling him and making him come out in that scene where they have him captured.
That was an intense scene.
One of the best scenes in the series. He uses this language that actually is used sometimes in DID, like, he's trying to inflict trauma on one personality to kind of like put it below a certain threshold level so that some other personality can kind of come on the stage, right? Yeah. So here's the idea that I have, and I might be able to test, that might be related to what you were saying, Kaysen. I kind of feel that everyone might be like that, but just most people are not, their main personalities are not like pushed to such a trauma level to sort of allow these kind of like pocket personalities to kind of come to the surface. Sure. And this kind of jives with things like alien hand syndrome, if you know what that is, where like people who have their brain severed in half will have like, they'll be trying to eat a bowl of cereal, but then like one hand will be like blocked in the other hand.
Yes, right? That's right. Yeah. Because they're not communicating, right? Yeah, that's crazy.
So basically, one of the projects that I'm working on is using transcranial electromagnetic stimulation and light and sound stimulation to upregulate, I guess you can say, rhythmic neural pulsing to create more cohesion. Without going into the details, this has some bearing on Alzheimer's disease. But what I'm very curious about, you can disrupt this as well with sort of like discordant waves, I guess you can say. I wonder if there are ways, like if you could take somebody who has DID and put this kind of therapy on them that forces neurons throughout the brain to more rhythmically communicate with each other, will that do anything to kind of resolve their DID? And if you do the reverse, if you take a normal person and you kind of try to fragment their brainwave patterns, does that indicate things like schizophrenia, etc., like that? So these are areas where like this, I jumped from math to sort of biology or electrochemistry or whatever.
Neurology.
Yeah, neuroscience. But these are like areas that I find like fascinating about these stories. That's something else that Tagashi is doing, is that there are real world like scientific corollaries to these things, and games like this are giving, not that it's just me, but are giving people like me ideas on how to like empirically test some of these things.
That's so cool.
It really is, yeah.
Like if you want to know how art can change the world, like there you go, man. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you put me on the spot there, Mike, a little bit. Did I do okay?
As always, you over-deliver.
Yeah.
I loved it.
There was one thing that we talked about before we started the recording that I'm not sure that we've completely gotten into the weeds on. And it relates to Kanan's struggle with, I was designed to do this. But I have a will inside of me that like fights against that. But is that me like denying my own existence? I think that he has a short conversation with Kanan about this. And then they show like several points where where Chaos is sort of like concerned about Kanan and is kind of trying to help him work through this problem, this existential issue he's going through. And that was something that I think really stood out to me on kind of like the second run of the game as we were starting to like actually record the podcast episodes was this concept of Kanan sort of wrestling with this idea of essentially fate, right? Like, this is what I was designed to do. And I think it's really apt that he's a Realian, right? He's a robotic being in a sense. I know he's not technically, I know that he's made from organic matter, but he was designed for a purpose. And he's sort of fighting with this idea of like, can I even, if I wanted to, defy that? And in the end, of course, the scene with Voyager and how he tricks him into that, we obviously get him exercising his own will to power in a sense there.
Yeah.
But
of course, Nietzsche would say, no. No, right. You can't.
But what I wanted to get into was we had talked a little bit before the recording, before we started recording, about how this applies to more than just one character. This isn't just like a Kanan character arc thing. This is actually a much broader thematic
it's
idea.
Almost every main character,
right.
At least like in the party. Because you have Chaos was designed basically by the universe to be the guardian of the lower domain or whatever. Junior was a URTV. He was designed to exterminate Udu. Cosmos obviously was designed. Ziggy is, brought back to life as an android. He was designed. I mean,
but even characters like Shion, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like she is like the spitting image of the Maiden of Mary Magdalene, and did she choose that?
Yeah, well, she was the
Nephilim's talking to her like, "Oh, you have to do you can do it," and she's like, "What, me? I'm just like a person."
Yeah. And in a sort of metaphorical way, Shion was also, you could consider her designed by Kevin.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
To do their whole thing.
Yeah.
So
she didn't choose that. Yeah.
No, she didn't. She was being manipulated without her knowledge. Like almost every member of the party. The only one. I'm now thinking of Jin. If he falls into that paradigm, he probably does. But I'm being on the spot.
you might have to dig deeper. Same thing with Alan, where it's like, he fell in love, and to what degree is like agency involved in who you fall in love with? Like, okay, we can get pretty low level there, but at least on a pretty high level, a lot of these people were highly specialized, highly designed for this specific purpose.
Right.
Well, it's funny because I think Mike and Kason, you've done a better job of bringing this back to mathematics than I tried to do, because this is like the central issue, right? Determinism versus free will, right? The billiard ball universe or not, right? So yeah, 100%. That's a good point, TJ. Like a lot of the characters are literally kind of programmed in some way. Although
even the villains, right? The Testaments are like designed by Wilhelm for their purpose.
Right.
And
like
Kevin
especially
ultimately turns on Wilhelm in the end, doesn't want to fulfill his purpose.
And Wilhelm himself is like the arch designer, because he started Vector, he started Ormus, really, like all the big sort of macro level organizations in this universe. Like he's pulling the strings behind all of them.
And so to what degree does anyone have agency in a world where he has manipulated things for millennia?
Right.
This is actually really good, because I think Xenosaga manages to pull off being able to sort of give like two kind of contradictory messages, but are kind of like both good, which is like almost like, again, the Albert Camus quote of like, if you're Sisyphus, you have to imagine him happy, right? Well, if you are stuck in that situation, if you have no free will for real, then still kind of try to cultivate this like love of life. So even if that's the case, you still love it, right? But also try to like change the future.
If not, also try to get that rock up the hill, and maybe one day you might do it.
Yeah. So it's kind of having its cake and eating its too, but it works. But even though a lot of the characters are literally programmed, I think that by extension, with people like Jin and us, right, everyone has that question. Like, do I have free will? Because it all depends on how you walk it back. Like your decision, everything even the choices that you were able to make now freely are completely, you walk it back to like what your parentage was, what your economic situation was, what theirs was, et cetera, all the way back to the birth of the universe, right? And that's the determinism, right? Which is probably more likely than not true. But
well, it seems, based on our tools of observation, it seems accurate. But I think there's a bias pre-programmed into those tools to find determinism. Like I think that was the assumption behind the tools to begin with. And then lo and behold, we find that's what the tools find. But
there's also the neuroscience aspect of this, which is like
we've talked about that.
Yeah, your decisions are kind of made like 40 milliseconds before you think they are.
Yes, but does that still mean that you didn't do it? That just means you maybe aren't aware of it. But what is the you to speak of, especially as we talk about internal family systems? And are you sure that the you that was in your subconscious that made that decision before the you that you think is you was conscious that decision was made? Does that still mean that you didn't make the decision?
Okay, I'm about to go off the deep end a little bit, so try not to laugh at me too hard. But you'll see why I have to bring it up. Like 50, I probably shouldn't say this stuff publicly, but like 15 years ago, before I was officially a scientist, I was like really, really into the occult, and I built I built this computer system to try to mathematically be able to assess whether like precognition is possible or not, and I called it the Anonymous system, which is why I have to bring it up. Right? And do you guys know who James Randi is? The amazing Randi?
Yeah, the skeptic dude.
So unfortunately, he recently passed away.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but before he passed away, sometimes people that I know, because I know him, people would tell me, oh yeah, James would tell the story about this person who had this system that like might have actually won his prize, like to prove precognition is real. That was me.
No way.
Oh my God. I had like submitted this computer program. I was like, listen, I'm not saying I'm psychic or anything like that, but here's a computer system that you can put Sylvia Plath to or whatever. But if somebody is psychic, like I want that money, right? Like, but so here you go. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is the whole idea that I'd love to like, I kind of orphaned the project is sort of drifting, but I'd love to like resurrect it now with like proper engineering, because this question of like if precognition is real or not and like the nature of it could have some bearing on like is determinism or free will a thing.
Right. It's almost the only important question at the moment. It's like the only one that matters.
Yeah, like I'll give you an example, one quick example of how like if you design the scientific experiment the right way, you'd like tease out one thing versus the other. Like say if I had this computer system where it's just doing like the Zener card stuff, pick a card, guess or whatever, right? If you were able to, and this is what the system used to do, if you could generate the random number that picks the card based on something that is truly random. Like I was using atmospheric noise, but you can use atmospheric noise or nuclear decay, right?
Yeah, that's the best, but it's still not perfectly random, right?
Yeah, but the point is, if you design a system to withhold that choice, like there could be a system where you guess and then it picks the random number, or it picks the random number first and then you guess. You do different time deltas on that. So again, this is all assuming that precognition is even possible, which is probably a deal breaker. But if it was, if you were, depending on the kind of results that you would get based on the time deltas, is it constant? Is it harder the further away in time? Does it work a little bit if you have a microsecond, but not if it's a minute? This might have something to say on like what is the nature of determinism or not. So anyway, one of my crazy ideas I don't generally talk about in public, but if anyone out there wants to see this happen, just like contact me and throw a lot of money my way and I'll make it happen.
I just want to chime in here really fast and say that we got a lot more into this kind of discussion on free will versus determinism in our podcast series on Planescape Torment. And so I don't want to like necessarily repeat too much of what we said there, but I do think that in general, this concept is explored a lot in Japanese RPGs. Almost all of them, actually, to a certain degree. And what I'm curious about is whether people here on the panel feel like I guess what I should ask first is what conclusions do you think are being made here, if any, by the game, the developers, by the creators, by the storytellers?
What I see is the game saying free will exists because we can break the cycle that was placed in front of us, even after it's happened 1,000 infinity times. It doesn't matter, that we can take ownership of ourselves and forge our path forward. That's what the game seems to be saying. In a bit of a rebuke to Nietzsche, actually.
Yeah, is that for me about the whole thing about free will against determinism? There's one element that I always feel that it's not properly talked about, which is that people it is not. They don't talk about the concept of power, but power as in your capacity to do things. You know, it's like, okay, did you fail because you didn't have a choice, or only because you couldn't do it because you didn't have the capacity for doing it? And that goes back to my previous distinction between lamenting things and regretting things. I mean, the thing is that for me, if you have the capacity to try, then that's free will to me. It's like, for example, saying that you don't have free will. It's like saying that you don't have free will because you cannot choose to just flap your arms and fly. That's the example that I always go back to. You know, to me, if you can make that analogy, then there's no such thing as not free will. You know, but again, you have to keep in mind that it's one thing to not doing one thing because you didn't have a choice. In which case you lament something, or you didn't do it because you couldn't. Again. You couldn't do it because you didn't do it because you couldn't. In which case, you lament something, and you didn't do it because you could do something about it, but you didn't, or regretting against lamenting. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah,
I guess that makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess for my answer, like I think. Obviously, as a lot of games do, there's definitely this kind of, it feels like it wants to give you this message of like free will exists, so make good choices and do transcendent things, right? I actually kind of feel like that's almost like tangentially related to the real point, which is almost like regardless of whether the universe is a billiard ball system or not, that doesn't matter. Like how you choose, like act as if you had free will, whatever the real physics underlying situation is, and try the thing that I take away too is that rather than trying to become obsessed with these kind of things and trying to return to the past in a purely nostalgic swaddle me in the innocence of the youth, or I need to go back and change that thing, is how do you live in the now and make things as good as you can now, from now forward.
Because it will always be now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, Keith, too, that's exactly kind of what the game is trying to say when it's got these huge universal concepts and the backdrop is like these characters' personal traumas and their relationships and stuff like that. So, yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, I like the thought of like, even if, and there's no way for us to know this, even if, as you said, the universe is this like billiard ball, reaction system, like, act and live your life as if you have freedom. I think I think that's a beautiful way to put it, and I think when I think of it, I think that is what the game is trying to suggest.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, maybe that's what a little bit what Shion meant with even if the future is predetermined, we have a infinite number of paths to choose from.
That's the quote I was thinking of. Yeah,
me too. Yeah,
yeah.
I love how they put it in there too, because the whole game is saying basically, the world isn't determined. You have free will. And then at the very end, they put in this line, but even if it is predetermined, you still can do
really don't.
whatever you want.
Yeah.
I love how they kind of threw that in.
Yeah.
Right.
And Shion even goes further than that, which is like, I kind of got what Wilhelm was trying to do, but I don't know.
I know, yeah. She was like, I totally understand.
Yeah, in a weird way, I do too. Like, I mean, again, like the villains in these games, more often than not, it's like, they're horrible people, but it's like, I get why they went down that road.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay. I wanted to save some space here at the end to address some things that people had left in comments that they wanted us to touch on that maybe they thought we hadn't gotten around to. But before we pivot over there, I wanted to just ask one more time to the panel. Is there something that you guys had wanted to bring up in this conversation that we have not touched on yet?
Trying to remember what I touched on. So
I have a few things, I guess, probably.
Okay.
So, like before we started recording, I was kind of talking about how Xenosaga kind of related to Xenogears and like how it's analyzed. And just, I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I will say that the opinion of Xenosaga is a lot different now online than it was back then. Yes. It's viewed in like an entirely different way, and I think it's most likely because a lot of people really didn't understand it, or at least like people weren't putting their like ideas out there, and also like the accessibility of the games and like a lot of things. Either way, like the overall like discourse on these games has changed over time significantly. But one thing I really want to talk about is like Xenosaga in relationship to Xenogears and how it's kind of like an inversion of those concepts a lot of the time, in the sense that it will do things the exact opposite way of Xenogears on purpose. And what I mean by that is that like if you look at it so if you look at there is this mirroring analysis that exists online that kind of compares the two games. And
I read that.
Yeah, what I like about it is that it kind of views the two different stories as like kind of like a gestalt, to where you have like one side of one thing and then you have the other side representing something else. And that is like all throughout these games. Like it's like a hint of Xenogears that you get off of this all the time. But Xenogears kind of has like this I'll just like say it like this, kind of like you start off in Xenosaga, the very first scene of Xenosaga in episode 1. It's the scene where they're digging up the Zohar for the first time, and it's kind of meant to be like, I think it's a reference to Stargate 1994, where they're digging up the Stargate. But the point is, they're on Earth in this scene, and then the very next scene after the Zohar is revealed to everyone, you're in space now. But in Xenogears, the exact opposite thing happens. You're in space, and the Eldridge is fending off these monsters or Deus or whatever, and the very next scene after, you're on the planet. And so it kind of like does things very specifically in reverse to Xenogears. There's like a color scheme difference, where you have like the box art of the game where it's like Fae, and you have like the red X. That's the US box art, and you have like the masculine Fae figure, and then you have on the Xenosaga box art, you have, most of the time it's Cosmos. Sometimes I think in episode 2 you see Xion, but it has a blue theme, and it's really interesting how like these two games kind of like delineate between like red and blue, like as opposites, because that's maybe it's a Star Wars thing. I'm not exactly sure, but and in the final scene too of Xenosaga 3, you have like Cosmos in space. So you have like the computer like heading towards the planet, and in Xenogears you have like the reverse. You have like the computer on the planet, right? So it's just like there's a lot of things that these games do that are intentionally reversed from Xenogears, and it's kind of like a Xenogears like B-side kind of thing in a way, where you have like multiple elements. And it's really interesting too, like these games are like obsessed with like Jungian archetypes and like stuff like that, and you have these characters that like kind of represent like ideas from Xenogears. So you have like Junior, right, who is like a kid, not an adult, kind of like Emeralda, but he's also a gunslinger like Billy, and he's also like this rash guy, and he's on this ship like Bart. So you have like all of these, like this combination of ideas from Xenogears in the game. And I really think that it's like it should be like, it's not like that they should be like, the two works should be like constantly compared and like pitted against each other, but they should be kind of like viewed more holistically than that. But it's not generally the kind of thing that you see when you see conversation about these games online.
Sure. Do you have like any working theories as to why you think maybe that was the approach, that sort of almost like B-side or reverse way of doing things?
Well, it's really interesting too, because there's a big. So also, I want to credit this analysis too, because I have read it, but in like Xenosaga, a big theme is like fear, and fear is like the big, is kind of the big one. That's the kind of thing you see, and then grief is the theme in Xenogears that is kind of used, and you have like Graf versus like Dmitry Yuriev, right? As like kind of like they're kind of similar. I don't think it was too. I definitely don't feel like they wanted to copy Xenogears. I feel like they definitely wanted this to be original. But they wanted us to be familiar enough with the stuff that there's the analysis. But they really wanted us to be familiar with these things that they presented in Xenogears, and I feel like they kind of used Xenogears as like a springboard for initiating a lot of the conversations that Xenosaga had. I feel like if you're playing Xenogears first and then you're playing Xenosaga, you're probably playing it in the right order, in quotes, because you'll probably be able to understand Xenosaga a lot better that way. And the same is true in for future games as well. I think those games definitely enhance our understanding of what Xenosaga was trying to do, like even retroactively now that Xenosaga is like 20 years old, you know. I think that's pretty much like all I have. Like, I don't know where I'm going with the point, but like the point that I really wanted to make was that they're kind of like two sides of the coin in a lot of ways for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that it kind of ties back with something that I said before about how there are still people up to this day who are obsessed with the idea that Xenosaga and even Xenoblade are like stealth remakes of Xenogears. And again,
like
it is
they
something
all
that really
directly connect into one another somehow, even though that's like there's no way.
No. It's like, but the thing is that it's not that. It's more like they all take elements from the same pool of references that Takahashi seems to be really obsessed with. So obviously there are parallels, but going into these, I mean, this is something a little bit of a pet peeve of mine that goes way beyond just the Xeno games. But you have this character who has white hair and shoots guns. He's supposed to be either Chaos or Junior on Xenosaga, and Jin and Sidan are like the prime example. I think is like, but in the end, it's like no, they're completely different characters. It's just that they have maybe the same point of reference, but I think they're supposed to be completely different,
like surface level sort of thing. And that's what like is like fascinates me about, especially comparing Xenosaga and Xenogears, because like I know they're technically supposed to be, their own thing. They're not directly connected in any way, but like if you read Perfect Works, Xenogears Perfect Works, and you read like the timelines that sort of outline like the prehistory of the Xenogears world, it's very, very, very close to what we see in Xenosaga. I'm actually making a video on this right now, so sneak preview. But there's like it's a throwaway part in Perfect Works, like in one of the years, it just says, the timeline just says strife in the region intensifies. That's it. Very vague. And you read this, and it's like, what is this referring to? But if you've played Xenosaga, the year in Perfect Works, that it's like almost identical to when the Miltian conflict started. So to me, and this is just my theory, like I feel like Xenosaga, if Takahashi had not left Square, if Square had given him the money to make the follow-up that he wanted to, instead of funneling that into Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, Xenosaga would have been the follow-up to Xenogears. And when he left Square, started Monolith Soft, it's like, okay, I have all these ideas, I don't want to throw them out. Let's just start from square one, make our own thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah. And the thing is that Perfect Works is like the element that throws all this stuff into this array, because there are people. The thing is that it's a appealing narrative. This idea that this artist had this idea inside his head that he wanted to do like 25 years ago, and he's been struggling to have that idea made realized.
Right.
And the thing is that one thing that I always say about the Perfect Works timeline is that, I mean, obviously, back in the day, I kind of bought into the idea as well. But if you look at it critically, that timeline, it's very bare bones. It feels more like a concept, that it was in his mind and he put it into paper, but he didn't really flesh it out. Because I mean, the example that I always go back to, in Perfect Works, they say that basically episodes 2, 3, and 4 are the three previous eras from Xenogears. But if you think about it, that's not, from a narrative standpoint, that's not a very good idea, because all those three episodes end up in tragedy, with Ellie dying and things going like really to shit.
Right.
That's not a very good thing to do on a long running series, to have 3 episodes in a row ending with a tragedy that feels very similar. People get emotionally burned out.
Right, and
it's not the same thing to have this story. Yeah.
On a more basic level, I always think like if Takahashi had followed that sort of outline in Perfect Works to the letter, if he was to make like episode 2 all about Abel, it's like, what would he have told us that he wouldn't have, that he didn't already mention in Xenogears? Like, those stories are kind of like, we got as much as we really needed to know about those characters in Xenogears itself.
Yeah, I want to pivot this to answer Mike's question for myself in terms of things that we didn't talk about yet, and I'll try to be quick because I know we're coming to the end of it. When you were speaking about fear, Aidan, you made me think of something that obviously the fear that Udo infects into Albedo and Yuriev is like a major plot point here. And this ties into the whole idea of like immortality, whether it's good or bad. We talked about it at length in the episode 2 podcast, so I recommend everyone checks out the episode 2 podcast for more of a deep dive on that. But something that I'm thinking of, because like Albedo, for example, he is able to do real number domain immortality through his regeneration, right? Yuriev is able to do imaginary number domain immortality through being able to keep like pushing his consciousness into people, right? So they're sort of immortals, but all of the immortals that we see are driven by fear in this case, and that's well, I guess Albedo was thrust on him, but like kind of what they're doing. But I just wanted to note that I don't think this game or this series is against that idea of like, you know, a transhumanist future. I mean, a lot of the characters are living longer in Xenogears. You got people living hundreds of years, right? But what I think it is presenting, germane to some of the things that Mike has said in the past, of sort of like, regardless of how long you live, even if you do have a will to live longer, there's kind of like a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And the quote unquote wrong way would be one that's rooted as a running away from something, a fear of trying to mitigate something, instead of a running to something, an affirmation of life. And what I'm realizing now by playing this game again, and why I do think there's a stronger cohesion with Xenogears, at least in my opinion, I'm feeling much more like, even in its broken form or incomplete form, there still kind of is like, I could see someone making a game right now that could bridge the gap between this series and Xenogears and then kind of pick it up. You know, like basically the ideas that are in this game, in my opinion, speak to the end of Xenogears. Something that maybe a little too much personal information, but an idea that I found was a little bit haunting in Xenogears. Again, spoilers for the end of Xenogears. Please go play it, everyone. But in that conversation that Krellian and Faye have at the very, very end of the game, it's all about this: is there actually a real ability to truly know somebody else? And Krellian says no. He's like, you know, human. You know, the truth is that you want to, you feel like you want to connect with someone, but the reality is you will never even let yourself be seen. You're always putting on acts. You're always putting on masks. There is no such thing as true love or spiritual union. It's just an act of people placing themselves at this comfortable distance, right? And Faye is trying to reject this, right? But Krellian does sort of present kind of a compelling, kind of haunting argument of like, how do you ever really know? You know, there's this idea of the imago, right? The image that you have of somebody else, but is it really the other person, or that you're projecting what you think that the other person feels or is, right? And that idea I found to be very haunting in my own life of like, you know, am I ever going to be able to really connect with somebody else, or is it always kind of a self-delusion? And this game, actually, where I find a spiritual through line with that end of Xenogears, is this game seems to say it kind of almost doesn't matter as long as like you love legitimately the universe and other people and try to connect. Like you are in control of that no matter what. So like you can still contribute that. And I find that is spiritually ties these games, because the ideas in this game are kind of like the answer to the end of Xenogears, I think.
I just want to say I really love that reading. And
yeah, about that, there's one element from the Xenogears and Xenosaga as a whole that I always thought it was like really, really sweet. The idea that these two stories are the brainchild of a married couple, which is something that it's pretty unique if you think about it. Mm-hmm. It's like, I mean, there are so many love stories that fall flat because the people who write them haven't really fallen in love. But but both Xenogears and Xenosaga have very compelling love stories, and I think that has to be a really strong element. Even though in Xenosaga it's a little bit compromised because Tanaka obviously apparently had a really rough time during the development of this game, and Takahashi as well, although apparently on his side was more because of more corporate reasons. But even then, thinking about a married couple coming together and pulling this beautiful story. To me, that's one of the sweetest things about the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and and each of the two of them have their own strengths. Takahashi is the director, sort of the brings everything together, and Tanaka is primarily from as a script writer, and you can't without either of those two elements. It's like the Xenogears, the Angels and Xenogears. It's like you need to have both if you want to fly.
Yeah. Okay, so I really do want to get over here to a few of these comments that were left.
All right.
That being said, where you guys just left on, like the note you just left off on, would have led really, really well to some of my thoughts on, like, Jungian's theory of the anima and the animus. But really, I feel like those thoughts belong more to Xenogears. I feel like Xenosaga doesn't quite get into the Jungian concepts as much as its Nietzschean concepts.
Right.
And so I think I'm going to have to just leave these thoughts for another time. Maybe they'll come up again in a Xenoblade game in the future or something like that. Or maybe we'll do a revisit of Xenogears at some point in the future, and I'll kind of insert them at that time. But for now, I feel like I just want to kind of get over to some of these comments. But I did touch on this on the anima development side in the Xenogears podcast, for those of you who are interested in going back if you haven't seen that. And I talked a lot more about the animus in a at this point, not publicly released podcast episode that we did on Princess Mononoke, which will eventually become public. So
nice.
It'll go out there eventually, but I'm not going to dig into that rabbit hole right now because it would take me way too freaking long.
Yeah, that's an entire episode in itself.
Yes. So let's do this instead. We have a comment here from, like, it's really hard to read with these on. Robotsi, I think it is. Robotsi. Now, I don't know if anybody here is going to be able to answer this. I was kind of hoping Kaysen would be here for this one. I'm going to read the comment, and if anybody has an answer to this, something they want to share, feel free to do that. But really, I'm going to kind of point to Kaysen to respond to this in a comment on this video. Or if Max Darrett wants to do it. I know Max has been watching, and he is very, very familiar with alchemy, has studied that a lot. And so the question here, or the comment, is one thing that I think would be neat to see you guys talk about would be the whole alchemy concept going on with the four siblings now that you guys have seen the full picture. I would say Negretto represents his alchemical step, since the Negretto stage is supposed to represent facing your shadow, which in this case would be Dimitri. And also on Citrine, she was intended to have more story, like she was supposed to have a family that, sorry, I'm going to have to take this off to read this, probably would have made her role as a sort of sleeper agent more complex and her death more tragic. Before I go on, I wasn't aware of this. Was Citrine supposed to have, is this like a publicly known thing that she was supposed to have more story here?
Yes, Takahashi did quote this. Or it was either Takahashi or somebody from Monolith Soft quoted this. I will find that quote for you.
Okay. But, I want to say it was Tanaka, because I know I know that she, and I think there are a couple different quotes from her saying, like, where she said, like, specifically in regards to episode 2, like, things that she felt like in the final product that basically, were close enough to their original vision versus, like, things they had to just get rid of entirely.
Oh, wow.
And then I think there's, like, and I don't remember where this came from, but there's, like, I know there's a list somewhere of things that were that did have to be cut out entirely. And, but yeah, again, I don't know the source of that. It wasn't like in an interview or anything, I don't think.
Okay, that's interesting. I actually was not aware of that, so I'm glad you guys could clear that up for me. Okay, so Citrine was supposed to have more story. Another thing that was sort of cut was Rubito's adult form. The intention was that Rubito would be able to switch between his two forms in episode 2 onward, but that was cut, and now his adult form is more of a tease at the end of chapter 8 there. So I cannot, because I have not done the same level of study in alchemy as Kaysen or Max Sterrett has done, really comment on this and on like my feelings on like the full picture of the alchemical element and how it was worked into the story. Do any of you guys have thoughts you want to add on that point?
No, unfortunately, that's one of the things that I wish I knew more about, but I do not feel qualified to. That's a case. That's a case.
In my case, it's a little bit ironic considering that I work in the European Spanish dub of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I made some. I made some research on alchemy for preparing for the show, even though I was a big fan beforehand, but I never got into the 4 stages as much as I should have.
Okay.
Yeah. I have, I guess, more knowledge of alchemy than most, but Max, I'm sure, crushes me. From my perspective, I don't see much more than sort of like a superficial, color schemes and things like this, but just very, very glibly, right? Negredo, the first step is sort of like, you're burning away all of the, gook or whatever, like, right? And then albedo, the whitening, is like the purification of, after you go through the crucible and try to distill the junk, then you purify it, right? Which is the whitening. Then that gradually, goes into the reddening of like achieving the actual like lead to gold or etc. So there's the point that there's a teleology between this, right?
Right.
Black, white, yellow, sometimes red. And I don't necessarily kind of like see that kind of represented in the characters. They just kind of all seem like they're doing different things and have different roles. Like, I guess you could say that albedo is very pure in that he has a very clearly realized kind of like what he's trying to do and just is like all into it. So I guess you could sort of make that step. But like rubido, for example, like the problem here is that the alchemical process is a motion, right? So if anything, you'd expect there'd be a character who goes through the alchemical phases and kind of transforms. But like rubido is rubido from game 1, right? And he doesn't necessarily represent to me anything that's sort of like the complete alchemical process in game 1, right? So for me, I see it as this one is more like a superficial kind of thing, but I'll defer to Max on that.
Yeah.
How about you, Aidan? Anything?
I was just looking some stuff up and I found I don't even know where I got this. It's like this triangle symbol that I've seen in works that mention alchemy. It's like a triangle and a circle. Let me see if I can't.
I think I've seen that before.
Yeah. It rings a bell from Full Metal Alchemist too.
Yeah.
Right. That's probably where I've seen it, actually.
It's did it let me do it?
Yep, I see
so
it.
There, I sent it in there.
Open it up. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
I've seen this symbol and where it's like the Philosopher's Stone, and this is just like a cursory reading of it, but I could see like the 3 points there representing like the 3 brothers kind of in the story. And like in the end, after the process is all over, all you have left is rubido. And rubido is meant to represent like the Philosopher's Stone in a sort of a way.
That is true in that all of the characters, I guess, okay, maybe give Max some food here. All of the URTVs are kind of one character, right? They're all clones of Yuri.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And they all kind of connect with each other. And to your point, Aidan, get absorbed into each other. So I'll kick it over to Max from there after. But,
yeah. So Max, I know you've been watching the series. You've been commenting on some of the episodes. If you have the time and you feel the desire to give your take on this, I'd really love to get that, because I kind of feel very similarly to how Keith does. That it feels like one of those many surface level references, not one that was necessarily like deeply worked into the game's thematic core and plot. but rather one that just sort of like references a thing that you can go look up and get into if you feel the need to do so. But as has been demonstrated throughout this conversation, there are many points where I felt like that was kind of the case, or that there was something kind of weird, or this doesn't really fit, or I don't really get this. And it turns out it's just because I don't know what I'm talking about on that particular point.
Yeah. Right.
Aidan is the expert here.
Yeah. So we'll let those guys look for their comments and see if maybe they give some more thoughts on that. There was a comment that I had pulled up here, but I think we actually touched on a lot of this already, so I kind of want to skip down to one of the other ones down here. Where was it? Give me just a second to find it. A lot of comments last week. I want to make sure that I'm not skipping the one I really wanted to get into. Okay, not that one. I haven't wanted to put any of the question next time so you don't miss it. Out of context, Xenogears. How did you feel about it? Okay, this one's kind of interesting. I'm not sure. We might have brushed across this one, but it gets into more of. Well, let me just read it. I haven't watched yet, but I'm putting this here as a question to pose for next time so I don't miss it. How would you contrast Xenogears' representation of the Demiurge and the true god, Deus and the way of existence, versus Saga's, Wilhelm and Udu? I'm not even sure if those are the right analogs.
Yeah, I was going to say, who is...
Sorry, let me just finish real quick.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah, he's got one more sentence here. Within the Gnostic spiritual beliefs, how do you view the way that Saga did this versus Gears, and do you see some parallels? Okay, sorry for interrupting you there, TJ.
No, it's okay. Because what I wanted to say, just as a starting point, establishing who, if anyone, is supposed to be the Demiurge analog in Xenosaga. Because, I get what,
Udu is definitely an analog to the way of existence, but Wilhelm an analog to Deus?
Wilhelm didn't
not sure.
create the physical world in the same way that Deus did in Xenogears. He's just sort of again, it's the question I let off with, is there even a neat Demiurge analog in this series? I don't know. I'd have to think.
Okay. This is a great question. Whoever asked it, even though they said they didn't watch or whatever, I think it's a great question. I want to build off what TJ was saying, but I think what I think is undeniable or less controversial is that Udu, Wave Existence, is kind of the same thing in Xenogears and Xenosaga, and would represent the not Demiurge. The something more akin to the real deity. Now, we don't know from our perspective. Maybe there's a million Udus up there or whatever. We don't know that stuff, but he's definitely in that position, right? So I think that is kind of consistent. The question of the Demiurge, which is what the person was asking about, I think it's much clearer in Saga than it is in Gears. I don't think, to your point, I don't think anything is truly like the full Demiurge. You're right, no one is physically crafting the physical universe, right? But it's certainly clear that in Xenogears, Deus is kind of in that role, also with the name, right? But I think it's much less demiurgic and more just like this crazy bioweapon that has some access to god powers, right? But I also love that, just side note, I love that the song title of One Who Bears Fangs at God is the perfect title for that song, because it plays when Krellian and Faye are kind of talking to each other, and they're sort of acolytes of different gods, so they're kind of bearing, there's a lot of fang bearing in that scene. So awesome name. Anyway, for Saga, I think Wilhelm is much more of a candidate for an actual Demiurge. Now, I don't think Wilhelm has physically created the lower order domain, but especially in the Perfect Works, it seems like he's a manifestation and is created almost right after the first mover, created in the physical world, and then is literally orchestrating the billiard ball of everything.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Like, he's almost a metaphorical demiurge in that sense.
Because there was a path that has more knowledge of the true reality of, like, we're not going to stay trapped in this loop and try to actually save the real universe. But Wilhelm is designing things to, like, no, we're not going to do that. You're going to stay trapped in this cage. He even says at some point, I believe it's a quote, he says something like, they think this cage that they exist in is actually reality, but it's just their cage. Like, he literally says
Right. Oh, yeah, I remember that.
So I think Wilhelm is literally functioning as the demiurge in this situation, where Deus...
Yeah, that's true, because Deus isn't even, like, in a sense... Like, I was going to say Deus isn't even really aware of what he's doing, which isn't super accurate, but Wilhelm is, like, calculating to the nth degree to in a sense that Deus is just kind of going according to his programming, I guess.
And also, in some conceptions, like, the demiurge isn't necessarily evil, right? It's more just kind of like...
that's true, yeah.
Unknowing, or, like, partially unknowing.
Yeah, right? That's the whole thing, because it's separated from the true... It's all about separation, and yeah,
and I think Wilhelm is in that role. Like, again, I obviously I'm on Team Shion and Alan and everything, right? But I think if you know the whole plot, Wilhelm is in his own way acting like legitimately heroic, right? Like he's not Wilhelm is not evil. He just thinks that the universe will literally be destroyed if we don't do this. So I'm going to make sure this thing happens.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Wilhelm's demiurgeness is, like, almost deceptively... It's deceptive in the sense that, like, he just looks like a human. And he kind of looks like a weak human, to be honest. But anytime the dude is talking, it is clear that he has crafted the fate of this universe to the T, to go exactly the way that he wants it to go. And I can't think of a better definition of what the demiurge is than that, right? Someone who comes into something who does not have, like, the true power of creation that the monad has, or in this case that Udu has, yet has taken the elements that are there and has tried to control it to such a degree that you might as well call him God, right?
You know, sorry, are you done?
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to say, and I don't remember where this came from, if it was in, like, the database or something, or in the episode 3 Perfect Works or whatever, but there's a thing where it's like Wilhelm in, thousands of years ago, he basically masqueraded as the Roman Emperor Tiberius, who was emperor when
it's in the
Christ was crucified.
database,
So in that sense, like, that's him in his role as the demiurge trying to get rid of this agent, I guess you could call him that, of the monad. So that it does tie in to that, yeah.
Yeah, you also just made me think of Krellian too, because in terms of the planning and manipulation and billiard ball pushing, there you go, aspect, Krellian is the most like that of all of the Xenogears characters. But now that I'm thinking about it, Krellian's aim is actually kind of the opposite of a demiurgic aim, where he, if you remember before, kind of Krellian doesn't only just want to go to the higher order domain. He initially wants to he thinks that it's impossible in this lower domain form for humanity to ever do the thing, to connect with each other, to stop whatever the problem is. So he literally just wants to shift everything into the upper order domain and become one with God. Right. So that's kind of like an anti-demiurgic.
Right. I was since you brought up Krellian, it made me think of, as far as Xenogears villains, of Miang. Because in a sense, Miang sort of functions as the human representation of the demiurge in Xenogears. Because she's literally, for 10,000 years, been plotting behind the scenes and guiding the universe in the sort of the same way that Wilhelm has. Miang is more in the foreground, and Wilhelm as far as we know, has done most of his work in the background. But I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, I just wanted to bring
I was going to say that's a good call because Miang, I think, is more Demiurge-like than Krellian because similar level of scheming and being there from the beginning and orchestrating everything.
And Deus kind of basically brought Miang, simplifying it, of course, but brought Miang into existence.
Yeah, and I was going to say that Krellian wants human consciousnesses to transcend and connect with wave existence. Miang
just wants Deus to be resurrected. Yeah. She just wants Deus to be back to...
literally just wants you to be meat in Deus.
Yeah, so, literally.
Miang more demiurgic final answer. Correct.
Yes.
Well, they're saying on Discord, they are saying, Ivan, Krellian is closer to Yuriev. Although, to me, maybe Yuriev is more like an inversion of Krellian in a sense.
I think Yuriev is a lot closer to Graf, honestly. Because both of them made contact with the Zohar, the wave existence Udu or whatever.
Yeah, it was an imperfect
horribly.
Contact. Yeah.
Yes, imperfect connect. Yes, yeah, I meant to say that. Yeah, and went crazy. They even both have the ability to steal other people's bodies and have been also kind of working behind the scene because Yuriev is hundreds of years old now, and he's kind of been playing his role. I think that's 100% correct. Because also, this is another funny thing of reading sort of the perfect works or whatever. Yuriev, I think you mentioned this, Mike, in one of the last of the videos. He actually has no clue what's going on at all. He's trying to use the god relics to become a god or whatever. That ain't how it works. He's just completely. Yeah, Yuriev really does have his own agenda. Because I don't think he even knows or is aware of what Wilhelm is doing. Again, I could be wrong about that, but it seems
why. This is how it ties into the earlier conversation. That's why Wilhelm is unconcerned about you.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
He thinks he knows what's going on, but
Yeah, Wilhelm is unconcerned about everything. So.
Yeah.
Some neat symbolism too.
Go ahead, Aidan. I want to go to Aidan real quick. What are you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say too, some really cool symbolism with Yuriev is if you the scene where you're you're in the Durandal and you go to the isolation area and he's standing there with his arms out. The back of his uniform is a Y with a piece that is missing out of it, kind of showing that his shadow is the incomplete Y data. And I also think that Wilhelm is closer to Krellian, but I think it could be argued that since Zarathustra, the system, is literally restarting the universe and putting it back to nothing, you could view the system of Zarathustra as the demiurge as well. Just because, and also the ancients tried to use Zarathustra to ascend, and Yuriev said, God did not permit mankind's actions. Probably Udu and whatever else in the higher domain, they couldn't accomplish that. Or I'm not sure exactly what all that means, but I think you could make a solid argument that the actual system of Zarathustra is kind of like Deus in that way, because it's a machine built by the ancients. And
right.
To your point about Wilhelm and Krellian, again, even though I think Krellian is kind of anti-demiurgic, to your point, at the end of the game, when Wilhelm, quote unquote, loses, he's not too broken up by it. He's kind of all right, if you think this can work, good luck. So I don't think, I kind of feel very similar. I could see Wilhelm being convinced to get on board at some point if he thought there was an honest shot to do this other way or whatever.
Right.
Okay. One thing I wanted to add to the point you're making there, Keith, about Yuriev not having any idea what he's doing, is I think my favorite aspect of Yuriev, his character and what I pull from that in the story, is this sort of, and I think it was Aidan who brought this up earlier, how terror or fear is a big theme in this game, whereas grief was more of a focus in Xenogears, right? There's a lot of focus put here on fear and terror and how that drives really bad assumptions, right? Everything that Yuriev did was wrong. Like, he could not accomplish what he was trying to do because his terror, his fear, he based all of his assumptions on that terror. And there's something very universal about this that, in my experience, throughout my life, as I've observed people, that is just so true about that. When you are basing your decisions, or I guess when your decisions are motivated by fear, you're almost always going to be blinded by bad assumptions that you make. Like, it's almost like that fear, that terror gets in the way of your ability to open yourself up to context that would change why you're making the assumption that you're making. And I see this just rampant in public discourse and in, you know, conversations about politics or whatever. Just the poisoning of the well that goes on in anybody trying to have like a constructive conversation about how we should, craft our society or changes we should or shouldn't make or whatever, is that almost everybody who gets passionate in these discussions are coming from a place of fear. Fear of that change and what it might mean for me and my tribe or whatever. Or, these people who are like making this point over here, they're trying to destroy my way of life. And so that fear or that terror being like the driving, motivating factor behind you taking the action that you want to take to better your society or your country or the world or whatever, is almost always limited by these like enormous blinders, these bad assumptions that you cannot see around because of the fear that's driving you. And that to me is like one of the most important things a person can do, is dispel their fears, face them. Face them really and truly, and dispel that fear, so that you can be free to actually look at important context that you're missing, because you're not scared that context is going to somehow undo your worldview or prove you wrong or embarrass you or make you look stupid or whatever, right? Dispelling fear is, I guess, as a way of closing this off and not going on forever, probably, in my opinion, one of the most important things you can do as an individual in your life, in order to do a lot of the things that we've talked about as far as like the existential questions in life, facing the reality of your immortality and many other things that you have to at some point like face this. It's coming for you whether you like it or not. And if you want that experience to be one that is positive and one that is not filled with the kind of regret that David has been talking about, you've got to get rid of this terror that drives you. So that was my favorite element that the Yuriev character brought to the story.
Well, also to your point, Mike, that's kind of what Shion was able to do in the end, right? She was able to like overcome like the fear that she was going to die, and she wanted to be with this person, but she decided that that was not good for her.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yes,
Okay.
I would like to add that about facing fear. The thing is that when we say that, a lot of people maybe get the wrong idea because they think that they should find a way to not feel the fear at all. That's not it.
Yes,
like at all. Because I mean, bravery. True bravery is not about not feeling fear. It's about feeling the fear, but do it anyway.
Right.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. That's a very large misconception. Is like, oh, I'm going to get to this point where I'm not afraid, then I can do it. It's like, no, that's not how it works. In order to overcome the fear, you have to do the scary thing and then get on the other side of that and go, oh, like, I made it. I'm okay.
Yeah, I want to build off what you're saying with Yuriev, because I think you're actually onto this very early in this podcast series, Mike. Because I remember you reached out to me like a long time ago when you're like, hey, I think the way Udo contacts people and what they perceive might have to do with terror management theory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We talked about this earlier. But yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I think it's actually confirmed in the Perfect Guides, where it's basically saying that, human beings are just by their nature like afflicted with this sort of existential dread about their own mortality, and it drives them terror management theory, etc. And the imperfect contact with Udo just ramps that up to like insanity, right? So that's kind of like what's going on with Yuriev in particular. And I think you're 100% right, because if your actions are based in fear, they're never cutting to the heart of the true thing that you're actually trying to accomplish, which I think what really, like, the fear of death is by extension a fear of meaninglessness, of annihilation, of like nothing matters. And you just can't live with that idea, right? That's probably what makes people so susceptible, if susceptible is the right word, to religion. Like you need to feel like something matters. Otherwise, why don't I just, not be here? Right.
Right.
So I feel like, to your point, like the more correct way to do that is to embrace that fear, to move forward, like David was saying, and that regardless, again, to be more selfless, to be more connected, like I'm trying to do things in the world, not just rooted in my own sense of annihilation. That like, regardless of whether I'm annihilated or not, I'm going to try to move in the world and do things, right? Which Yuriev doesn't do, which Albedo is kind of on the fence, I think. And then I guess apparently Nephilim is someone who's not afflicted by that fear and is trying to move the world into a good direction. So,
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to acknowledge really quick that there were many, many more really long, well thought, like passionate responses in the comments. I wish we had time to get to all of them. And I apologize to those of you who put that much energy into it and like we didn't quite get there. There's only one more I think we have time for. And the reason I want to choose this is because this is something we haven't really talked about at all in the Xenosaga series that we've done. But we did talk more about in Xenogears, and that is the Enneagram personality aspect to how Takahashi goes about designing his characters. So I kind of want to leave off on this one, and for everybody else who left great comments, know that I read every comment from the last video that we put up, and I learn a lot always from reading your comments, and you guys are great. I think we have like the best audience in the freaking world, and I learn from you guys all the time. But just as a time constraint, I feel like this is going to have to be the last one we go over. So this comes from Dark Kebab, 1868. Hey guys, as to Mike's call for comments regarding stuff we would like for you to talk or react about in the next episode, I would love to hear your thoughts and observations on the Enneagram personality types. They were released in the Xenosaga 1 official design materials for major Xenosaga characters. I know it's not about specific plot points you haven't talked about, as Mike requested, but I genuinely liked your analysis and breakdowns of these in your Xenogears podcast. Here's the list. So we have Type 1, the Reformer, the rational or idealistic type, and of those we have Andrew, Cherenkov, Febronia, Yuli Mizrahi. Then we have Type 2, the Helper, the caring, interpersonal type. We got Momo and Nephilim. Type 3, the Achiever, the success-oriented, pragmatic type. We have Sellers in that type. Type 4, the Individualist, the sensitive, withdrawn type. Look like there's none available for that. Nobody fit that description. Type 5, the Investigator, the intense, cerebral type. You have Joachim Mizrahi, Kevin Winnicott, and Wilhelm. Type 6, the Loyalist, the committed, security-oriented type. Alan Ridgely, Jin Uzuki. I think to a certain degree, well, I won't argue with the official document here. Jin Uzuki, Lapis Roman, Mary Godwin, Pellegrini, Shelley Godwin. Type 7, the enthusiast, the busy, fun-loving type. Hammer, Matthews, Miyuki, Itsumi, Shion, and Tony. Type 8, the challenger, the powerful, dominating type. Albedo, Gagnon, Jr., Margulis, and Virgil. And then type 9, the last one, the peacemaker, the easygoing, self-effacing type. Chaos, and Ziggy. Last thing he writes here. What I find interesting is that Jin and Pellegrini have the same personality types, and that maybe their relationship was doomed to fail from the start, especially because they were on opposite sides. What are your thoughts on this? Anybody want to take that one first?
Specifically about Jin and Pellegrini?
Well, just about the Enneagram.
Or just any of them?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me think.
So, okay.
I was trying to find the comment you were talking about so that I could have it up.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Aidan.
Oh, no, I was just trying to find the comment.
Oh, sorry about that. It's well... It's
I think I found it.
Did you find it? Okay.
Actually.
Which video is it?
From the
last one.
The last one, yeah.
I want to say one thing. I want to say one thing before anybody starts on this or makes an attempt at it. I had a really amazing conversation with Jonah a few days ago. He's one of our viewers, and he and I got on a phone call. He wanted to ask me some questions and run some ideas past me for a game that he's designing right now. And he talked a lot about his research into Enneagram. It's actually like a huge key aspect to the game that he's designing. Mm. And I'm not going to get into how, because I think he's onto something so brilliant with that I do not want anyone else to like have a whiff of that before he has a chance to get his game made and put out there. But I would invite him now, if he's watching, to come and give his thoughts on that, because he has done some very, very, very extensive research into Enneagram. So I've called Max to answer the other question about alchemy. I'm calling on Jonah if you are so inclined to give your thoughts on the Enneagram stuff. Okay.
I was going to say, the Enneagram stuff isn't, again, it's like the alchemy thing. It's something that I'm not super familiar with.
Yeah, I guess I could try to start us off a little bit in that, maybe food for Jonah. The one thing that jumped out at me is I'm not sure if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I agreed with Shion's designation.
Exactly, yeah. And Cherenkov's as well.
Yeah.
Cherenkov is reformer.
I would put Shion into the investigator observer personally, but that dovetails into my second point, which is with these kind of personality rubrics, I have a real hard time with them personally, because it's hard to kind of winnow down an entire character and do just one sort of bucket like this. So what I would find more interesting way to kind of discuss this, and maybe Jonah can do this, is, again, especially in a story like this, characters are going through motions and making big changes. It would be instructive to almost kind of see a narrative arc of Shion starts aligned with, investigator, moves to this when this happens, moves to that. I think that creates more actual sort of discussion around this.
And is that and this betrays my lack of knowledge about the Enneagram stuff. Is it a thing for someone to start as one type and then move to another? I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah.
Well, the way that I have,
you're supposed to.
Oh, you're supposed to.
That, you're supposed to have a primary type and then wing types, which kind of branch off into.
Oh, okay.
So,
I think there's a diagram of how
yes. In our Xenogears podcast, we actually had Kaysen's wife Breezy talk about this, because she's super into studying.
That's
personality
right.
stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
And so she went all into that about the types that are connected to it's there's triangles essentially that connect three types together.
Okay. Yeah.
And so anyway, I don't remember and haven't not had the chance to study this before coming to this recording session to really confidently speak on this. But I'm glad that you guys also doubted some of these, because I was well, this is official design materials. How involved is Takahashi in the writing of a document like that? So I doubted myself for a second, but then as soon as I saw you guys doubting, I was okay, maybe I was correct to doubt this, because I would not have put Jin where they put Jin either.
Right.
Like Jin is clearly the cerebral investigative type, not the loyalist type. But,
and the problem
the thing, keep in mind that these kind of character sheets and these archetypes are supposed to be only like a baseline. You're not supposed to follow them to a T. Like it's like instructions that you can deviate from. So even if Takahashi started off with this diagram, I doubt that he went he didn't allow himself to deviate from it.
Right. And I was going to say about the official design materials in particular is that it's hard for anyone in the English-speaking world to really, know anything, because as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, the entire thing has never been translated into English, unlike Perfect Works.
It's been partially translated, but there are portions of it that are missing still.
Right,
even after all this time.
Yeah, which is a weird oversight. Because I think the episode 3 one, whatever that one's called, that's been fully translated. It's like that's the one book that's like that's a gap. I wish I knew.
Which it has fascinating stuff in it. The official design materials too. It has stuff about like realians and like the science of the world, and it has a bunch of incredible information in it. But
and I love
unfortunate we can't have that.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody can get on that.
Translate the DS game.
Let's see if I get enough time to get to it.
You'd be the hero.
Right now it's impossible. Right now it's impossible, but maybe later on when my Japanese gets a little bit better and I don't have like 1,000 things going on at the same time.
That's fair.
I do want to say that, like, just generally speaking, I think it's really cool that Takahashi uses this as a baseline for writing his characters, just from the sense that what it creates as far as like outlining your story are characters that are going to act like consistently. Like it gives you a guideline on this is how a character should react to this event or to this thing happening or whatever. Like I've based them concretely here in this like personality type. Now that gives me a guide so that my characters can act consistently and so that people who share maybe some of those personality traits are going to be able to relate to them. So I think from like a writing and a storytelling perspective, it's like a really good tool to use in order to make sure that your characters are working in ways that are convincing to the audience. Well, everybody, this has been a really, really fun conversation. I've had you guys here for 3.5 hours,
almost 4 hours.
So I appreciate all of you taking the time. I really do. That's a huge investment, but I feel like these conversations really do a lot to enrich my life. I feel like I learn a lot, just as much, if not more, from my viewers than from the games themselves. And so thank you for coming on. Is there anything else anybody would like to leave off on before we close?
Yeah. Well, first for me, one last thing that I wanted to say before my conclusion is that another thing that Xenosaga did for me was to get me to know English voice acting. I know that the games get a lot of crap for that, and maybe me not being a native speaker kind of softens my perception of it. But even then, for example, Bridget Hoffman as Cosmos, especially in episode 3, where she plays arguably 4 different characters, and she nails every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's something that was completely mind-blowing, and it's still, to this day, my favorite performance in a video game ever. And it's kind of a bummer that they couldn't call her again for Cosmos cameo in Antelo's cameo in Xenoblade 2. But yeah, that's something that Xenosaga did for me. And also, small side, do you know who Wilhelm's Japanese voice actor is?
No, I do not.
Oh, I did at one point, but I forgot.
Nobuyuki Hiyama, who was the voice for Adult Link in Ocarina of Time.
No way.
So having
totally
these
playing against type there.
yeah, but it's so funny that he has some of the most iconic screams in video game history. Even to this day, his voice in Ocarina of Time, he's still the voice that most people think of when they think about Link screams. And he plays like this character who isn't faced by anything.
And in anime too, he has all these anime roles when most of what he does is screaming. Like he was Viral and Gurren Lagann, and he was Guy and Gal Gaigar, and it's like most of those shows he's just screaming for all of it. I would never he would never be on my radar for someone who should voice Wilhelm. That's amazing.
But what I was another.
Sorry, let's
go ahead.
Let's have TJ go.
Oh no, I was just gonna say because you were talking about we were talking about the voice acting. As a native English speaker, I think the voice acting in these games are for the most part phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then another really nice memory that I have was to the first English voice actor that I've ever met was Crispin Freeman, which was completely by accident because I was living in Frankfurt at the time, working at Nintendo, and Frankfurt has like a Japanese culture annual festival, the Japan Connection on the Goethe University, and I don't know why he came to that festival invited, and he gave a panel about it, but I didn't know going in. I went to the Japanese festival because Japanese festival, and then I was walking next to a door that had like a small signpost there saying Crispin Freeman in 15 minutes. And for me, it was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And I had to get in, and I was shaking like a fangirl the entire time.
Oh, yeah. I've met him at a few cons when he's come here to Chicago, and he's just a wonderful, nice person, and he's he gives very entertaining talks on whatever he talks about. I could listen to him talk about anything. Yeah. And 3, he got him to autograph my instruction booklet for episode 1. So
for me, I made him record a small message to a good friend of mine who is also the biggest Xenosaga fan in the world. I messaged with the Alvito voice, and he absolutely loved it.
Oh, that's great.
And let's moving on then. And last thing, it was something about the maybe excessive ambition of the story, because I remember there's something that stuck with me when playing episode 1. That is an entry in the database about Jin that says, almost, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's in the game, is we apologize for the people who are really looking forward to see him, that he's not going to appear in this game. And for me, that stuck with me, because it was wait, what? I mean, I know that you have some fans from Xenogears, but aren't you going a little bit too far here? Assuming that people are looking forward to see a character that they only heard two sentences up to this point.
Right.
But even then, it's endearing in a way.
Yeah. But it's and at the same time, he was supposed to appear in that game. So it's, I think it's sweet that they would even then, thinking about, the fans and
what they would think.
Yeah. And then, okay, now I'm really finishing. This is my closing statement, you could say. The thing is that when it comes to the discussion of Xenogames as a whole, it's something that it's often said in the Xenogames fan base is that Xenosaga has middle child syndrome, because everyone is talking either about Xenogears or Xenoblade, but almost no one is talking about Xenosaga. Mm-hmm. If you go to YouTube, and it's very rare to find videos, let alone videos which views break the 5 digits mark. TJ, you're one of them, so congratulations.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, one of the reasons why I made, that video, and I mean, I hold, the Xenosaga videos in particularly high esteem, because that's what sort of got me back into making YouTube videos again in the first place. And the reason why I made those in particular is because I did a search, and there was exactly one other video that wasn't just 3-hour uber complicated lore breakdowns. And it's there was nothing. There was literally nothing. And I'm like, okay. So if no one else is going to do it, it's got to be me, I guess. So
yeah, it's unfortunately like right now during this conversation, there was one moment that I entered on YouTube and I just put on the search Xenosaga, and the first video that I got was a Spanish video saying, "Why did Xenosaga fail?" And he was like, "Oh my god,
oh no,
it's that bad." Yeah, and the thing is that Xenogears fans tend to look at Xenosaga as Takahashi's failure at catching lightning in a bottle a second time, and even bigger lightning at that.
Right, and although
oftentimes in a pretty mean-spirited way, it's kind of weird how Xenogears fans seem to have some weird contempt for Xenosaga sometimes.
It's like, yeah, you can like both.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, like, I would almost say that Takahashi himself almost like, because if you've ever heard him talk about Xenosaga after the series, is, you know, when he's given interviews about Xenoblade, everything he said, it's like, oh, this was such, you know, this was such a nightmare time for, you know, Monolith Soft, for, you know, he doesn't say anything good about, you know, it's all about like how difficult making these games were. I don't think he has very high, like, he doesn't, not that he, I don't want to say that he doesn't like them or anything like that, but I don't think he has very positive associations with this series.
at least with the experience of making them rather than the works themselves, I guess.
That's what I was trying to say. Just make them.
Anyway, Xenogears fans tend to have that opinion, and Xenoblade fans, on the other hand, see Xenosaga as little more than Monolith Soft's growing pains before they get to a point where they could make Xenoblade. And
that's the game where Cosmos came from.
And I'm going to repurpose a quote from George Whitman that I think is pretty appropriate thing. It's not that those statements are necessarily wrong. There's some truth to them, but that dismisses the actual intellectual and artistic value that Xenosaga itself has. I think that's extremely unfortunate, I think. Because again, I mean, Xenosaga is my favorite out of the three series, and yes, I'm saying series, not a single series. Mm-hmm. But I wish that people talk about Xenosaga in a more, you know, not so much in relation to their siblings, you know, like trying to take Xenosaga on its own terms and forming an opinion out of it. So I want to send this message, like, please try. I know that the games being inaccessible at this point, it's part of the reason why this is the case. But even then, if you can try to engage with these games in an honest way and talk about it, I mean, go to the comments that we didn't read and try to as a jumping point for conversations online. And who knows, maybe sometime in the future we can have them back again.
Yeah. I mean, there's not very many games out there that you could talk for 4 hours and like barely scratch the surface of you know what we could talk about. You know, I could go for another 4 hours if I was crazy enough. But
okay, real quickly, Aidan, anything else you want to
add? Just that I'm kind of blown away by this third game all the time. Just because like the turnaround between this game and episode 2 was like, I think it's like 2 years or something like that.
2 years, yeah.
Which I think it's the same engine. I think the games are in the same engine. They're just tweaked some. But I'm just kind of blown away by this game all the time. Like by what it's able to accomplish, even though the turnaround was like only like that much. But I guess that might be a time thing, because I think games take a really long time to make now, especially like for like the hardware that they're like kind of aiming for. But I don't think that there's like a lot of, I don't know, I just feel like there's just not a lot of games like this that for me managed to like just really nail pretty much every element, like story, characters, music, dungeon design. I thought the dungeon design was really good. Just, you know, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Keith.
Sure. Yeah. You know, echoing everything that everyone else is saying, but I also just want to underline, as I mentioned in the beginning, like this series, going back to Xenogears, has been like transformatively inspirational to me personally in my life, and has like painted the target for like literally the things that I'm doing in my work. If anybody listening is interested, some of the things I mentioned are like, credible scientific projects that are ongoing. If you want to get involved in any way and help, reach out to me or check out lifespan.io. But the last thing that I want to say, building off of that, and especially what David was saying, you were mentioning in terms of voice acting, but I want to broaden that out. Some of us graybeards, sure, have been having the fight for a long time of like whether video games are art or not, or whether they can be art or not. And I think we got video game installations in the MoMA now. I think we finally won that battle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I want to shine a light on, building off of your sentiments, David, is that the people that create these works, whether they're truly completely successful in their initial ambition or not, should really be recognized and conceived of as the artists and the pioneers that they are. I was like dead serious when I was mentioning this earlier. Like when the movie Interstellar came out, people were praising it that, this movie, because Kip Thorne was involved, an astrophysicist, like in how they were doing the black holes. Like they actually did some new physics in this, and like it helped astronomy that the artists made this movie. Like, wow, isn't that crazy, right? So there was a lot of like love for that fact of Interstellar, and I really feel like Takahashi and Xenosaga, like they should be getting those kind of accolades. Like some of the formulations that they've put together, whether it's overt in the story or in the backstory, are like genuinely groundbreaking ideas of merging these things that you wouldn't think would you merge, spiritual tradition, religion, psychoanalysis, complex mathematics, quantum mechanics. This is truly incredible work. And, like we should recognize that. And also, communities like ours should like celebrate them and celebrate each other for knowing to appreciate these things that are truly great works of art.
That's fantastic.
Also shout out, but shout out to the entire team, because we talk about Takahashi and Tanaka all the time, and it's like, poor Ko Arai.
He directed
Ko Arai gets a lot of shit. From me included, I'm guilty of that too. For my not so high esteem of episode 2, but no, he deserves more credit than he gets. Absolutely.
Yeah, and all the name Yuki Kajura. Oh my god, it's like I think that
the soundtrack of this game is like it's so good, and I think for me it's Kajura's best work, which is saying something. I mean, her work is routinely amazing.
No, I think her career really started with Xenosaga, because you can hear Xenosaga in all the work he made afterwards, like Garden of Sinners, Madoka Magica, Sword Art Online, the Fate series. There's always moments when I say, wait a minute, it's
insane that after episode 3, she never worked in a video game ever again. Yeah, like she's just done anime, which is fine, but it's like that blows my mind. But yeah, no, she's amazing.
Yeah, but also, I mean, obviously, like if even Shinji Hosoi, even if he is the mark or
Shinji Hosoi, Hosoi's a genius. His songs are just not well utilized in that game.
Let's not forget Mitsuda as well. Mitsuda.
Oh, Mitsuda,
and everybody finally all the nameless. All the nameless developers. I mean, I was praising like Shion's crying face. I don't know who made that, but whoever made that is like, oh my god, you are a god to me.
Yeah. As part of the themes of this game, you even if your name's not in lights, we see you. we see your work.
In some way, exactly. Yeah.
This is just like a really interesting aside, and we haven't really talked about like the crazy amount of stuff that was like released for this game in terms of like merchandise. Mm-hmm. But something I did want to bring up is that pretty recently Mitsuda's book for like the entire score of Xenosaga episode 1 recently has made its way online. So it includes every instrument. If you had an orchestra, you could recreate the entire soundtrack from the game. It's crazy.
Oh my god!
It was released by his studio. So yeah, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That it got made. Can you imagine if somebody made like Dark Souls soundtrack, but it was like the entire score of like the entire game. It's like just wouldn't happen.
Right.
All right. Well, everybody, again, can't really thank you enough for the willingness to come on and talk with me for 4 hours. This is fantastic. I really, really, really love everything that you've added to this conversation, and I think we'll all be talking again at some point in the future about
I hope so,
some other thing. I really feel like I've made great friends in all of you, so thank you for doing this. And on that note, we will be leaving off. So thank you, everybody, for watching our Xenosaga breakdown, our 3 different podcast series on it. We will eventually do Xenoblade. That's probably not going to happen super soon. We have some other stuff we want to do in between then, but it will be coming up. So all of you Xeno fans, there is more Xeno to come. Until then, thank you for watching, and see you again soon. Peace out.